Chapter 4. When Things Fall Apart. There are several different frameworks one could use to get a handle on the indeterminate versus determinate question. The math version is calculus versus statistics. In a determinate world, calculus dominates. You can calculate specific things precisely and deterministically. When you send a rocket to the moon, you have to calculate precisely where it is at all times. It's not like some iterative startup where you launch the rocket and figure things out step by step. Do you make it to the moon? To Jupiter? Do you just get lost in space? There were lots of companies in the 90s that had launch parties, but no landing parties. But the indeterminate future is somehow one in which probability and statistics are the dominant modality for making sense of the world. Bell curves and random walks define what the future is going to look like. The standard pedagogical argument is that high school should get rid of calculus and replace it with statistics, which is really important and actually useful. There's been a powerful shift toward the idea that statistical ways of thinking are going to drive the future. Peter Thiel. When I was attempting to sell the cloud computing services part of the Loudcloud business, I met with Bill Campbell to update him on where I was with the deal. The deal was critical because without it, the company would almost certainly go bankrupt. After I carefully briefed him on where we were with both interested parties, IBM and EDS, Bill paused for a moment. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Ben, you need to do something in addition to working on this deal. You need to do it alone with your general counsel. You need to prepare the company for bankruptcy." To an objective observer, this might sound like Bill was prudently advising me to build my contingency plan. But something in his voice and his eyes said something different. They said that he believed the contingency plan was going to be the plan. The conversation brought to mind a story that a friend told me about his brother, a young doctor. A 35-year-old man came to see my friend's brother. The man looked awful. His eyes were hollow and his skin was ashen. The young doctor knew something was wrong, but he could not figure out what. So he brought in an elder colleague to help with the diagnosis. The more experienced doctor examined the man and then sent him on his way. The old doctor then turned to the young doctor and said, "He's dead." The young doctor was flabbergasted. "What are you talking about? He just walked out of here alive." The older doctor replied, "He doesn't know it yet, but he's dead. He's had a heart attack. And when people that young have heart attacks, their bodies are not yet pliable enough to recover. He won't recover. He's dead." 3 weeks later, the patient died. I felt that Bill was telling me, although I was walking around trying to get the deal done, that I was already dead and that I did not know it. It was a very hard thing for him to say, and only the best of friends will muster the courage to break news that horrible. It was an even harder thing for me to hear. He told me so that I could emotionally prepare myself and financially prepare the company for the inevitable funeral. The odds of landing a company-saving deal during the technology industry's nuclear winter were close to nil. Chances were I was dead. I never built that contingency plan. Through the seemingly impossible Loudcloud Series C and IPO processes, I learned one important lesson. Startup CEOs should not play the odds. When you are building a company, you must believe there is an answer, and you cannot pay attention to your odds of finding it. You just have to find it. It matters not whether your chances are 9 in 10 or 1 in 1,000. Your task is the same. In the end, I did find the answer. We completed the deal with EDS, and the company did not go bankrupt. I was not mad at Bill. To this day, I sincerely appreciate his telling me the truth about the odds. But I don't believe in statistics. I believe in calculus. People always ask me, what's the secret to being a successful CEO? Sadly, there is no secret, but if there is one skill that stands out, it's the ability to focus and make the best move when there are no good moves. It's the moments where you feel most like hiding or dying that you can make the biggest difference as a CEO. In the rest of this chapter, I offer some lessons on how to make it to the struggle without quitting or throwing up too much. While most management books focus on how to do things correctly, so you don't screw up, these lessons provide insight into what you must do after you've screwed up. The good news is I have plenty of experience at that, and so does every other CEO. I put this section first, even though it deals with some serious endgame issues such as how to fire an executive and how to lay people off. In doing so, I follow the first principle of the Bushido, the way of the warrior. Keep death in mind at all times. If a warrior keeps death in mind at all times and lives as though each day might be his last, he will conduct himself properly in all his actions. Similarly, if a CEO keeps the following lessons in mind, she will maintain the proper focus when hiring, training, and building her culture. The struggle. Every entrepreneur starts her company with a clear vision for success. You will create an amazing environment and hire the smartest people to join you. Together you will build a beautiful product that delights customers and makes the world just a little bit better. It's going to be absolutely awesome. Then, after working night and day to make your vision reality, you wake up to find that things did not go as planned. Your company did not unfold like the Jack Dorsey keynote that you listened to when you started. Your product has issues that will be very hard to fix. The market isn't quite where it's supposed to be. Your employees are losing confidence, and some of them have quit. Some of the ones who quit were quite smart and have remaining ones wondering if staying makes sense. You are running low on cash, and your venture capitalist tells you that it will be difficult to raise money given the impending European economic catastrophe. You lose a competitive battle. You lose a loyal customer. You lose a great employee. The walls start closing in. Where did you go wrong? Why didn't your company perform as envisioned? Are you good enough to do this? As your dreams turn into nightmares, you find yourself in the struggle. About the struggle. Life is struggle. Karl Marx. The struggle is when you wonder why you started the company in the first place. The struggle is when people ask you why you don't quit and you don't know the answer. The struggle is when your employees think you are lying and you think they may be right. The struggle is when food loses its taste. The struggle is when you don't believe you should be CEO of your company. The struggle is when you know that you aren't over your head and you know that you cannot be replaced. The struggle is when everybody thinks you are an idiot, but nobody will fire you. The struggle is where self-doubt becomes self-hatred. The struggle is when you are having a conversation with someone and you can't hear a word that they are saying because all you can hear is the struggle. The struggle is when you want the pain to stop. The struggle is unhappiness. The struggle is when you go on vacation to feel better and you feel worse. The struggle is when you are surrounded by people and you are all alone. The struggle has no mercy. The struggle is a land of broken promises and crushed dreams. The struggle is a cold sweat. The struggle is where your guts boil so much that you feel like you're in spit blood. The struggle is not failure, but it causes failure. Especially if you are weak. Always if you are weak. Most people are not strong enough. Every great entrepreneur from Steve Jobs to Mark Zuckerberg went through the struggle and struggle they did. So you are not alone. But that does not mean that you will make it. You may not make it. That is why it is the struggle. The struggle is where greatness comes from. Some stuff that may or may not help. There is no answer to the struggle, but here are some things that help me. Don't put it all on your shoulders. It is easy to think that the things that bother you will upset your people more. That's not true. The opposite is true. Nobody takes the losses harder than the person most responsible. Nobody feels it more than you. You won't be able to share every burden, but share every burden that you can. Get the maximum number of brains on the problems, even if the problems represent existential threats. When I ran Opsware and we were losing too many competitive deals, I called all hands and told the whole company that we were getting our asses kicked, and if we didn't stop the bleeding, we were going to die. Nobody blinked. The team rallied, built a winning product, and saved my sorry ass. This is not checkers. This is motherfucking chess. Technology businesses tend to be extremely complex. The underlying technology moves, the competition moves, the market moves, the people move. As a result, like playing three-dimensional chess on Star Trek, there's always a move. You think you have no moves? How about taking your company public with $2 million in trailing revenue and 340 employees? with a plan to do $75 million in revenue the next year. I made that move. I made it in 2001, widely regarded as the worst time ever for a technology company to go public. I made it with 6 weeks of cash left. There's always a move. Play long enough and you might get lucky. In the technology game, tomorrow looks nothing like today. If you survive long enough to see tomorrow, it may bring you the answer that seems so impossible today. Don't take it personally. The predicament that you are in is probably all your fault. You hired the people. You made the decisions. But you knew the job was dangerous when you took it. Everybody makes mistakes. Every CEO makes thousands of mistakes. Evaluating yourself and giving yourself an F doesn't help. Remember that this is what separates the women from the girls. If you want to be great, this is a challenge. If you don't want to be great, then you never should have started a company. The end. When you are in the struggle, nothing is easy and nothing feels right. You have dropped into the abyss and you may never get out. In my own experience, but for some unexpected luck and help, I would have been lost. So to all of you in it, may you find strength and may you find peace. CEOs should tell it like it is. One of the most important management lessons for a founder CEO is totally unintuitive. My single biggest personal improvement as CEO occurred on the day when I stopped being too positive. As a young CEO, I felt the pressure of employees depending on me, the pressure of not really knowing what I was doing, the pressure of being responsible for tens of millions of dollars of other people's money. As a consequence of this pressure, I took losses extremely hard. If we failed to win a customer or slipped a date or shipped a product that wasn't quite right, it weighed heavily on me. I thought that I would make the problem worse by transferring that burden to my employees. Instead, I thought I should project a positive, sunny demeanor and rally the unburdened troops to victory. I was completely wrong. I realized my error during a conversation with my brother-in-law, Carthu. At the time, Carthu worked for AT&T as a telephone lineman. I had just met a senior executive at AT&T, whom I'll call Fred, and I was excited to find out if Carthu knew him. Carthu said, "Yeah, I know Fred. He comes by about once a quarter to blow a little sunshine up my ass." At that moment, I knew that I'd been screwing up my company by being too positive. In my mind, I was keeping everyone in high spirits by accentuating the positive and ignoring the negative. But my team knew that reality was more nuanced than I was describing it. And not only did they see for themselves the world wasn't as rosy as I was describing it, they still had to listen to me blowing sunshine up their butts at every company meeting. How did I make such a mistake, and why was it such a big mistake? The positivity delusion. As the highest ranking person in the company, I thought that I would be best able to handle bad news. The opposite was true. Nobody took bad news harder than I did. Engineers easily brushed off things that kept me awake all night. After all, I was a founding CEO. I was the one married to the company. If things went horribly wrong, they could walk away. But I could not. As a consequence, the employees handled losses much better. Even more stupidly, I thought that was my job, and my job only to worry about the company's problems. Had I been thinking more clearly, I would have realized that it didn't make sense for me to be the only one to worry about. For example, the product not being quite right, because I wasn't writing the code that would fix it. A much better idea would have been to give the problem to the people who could not only fix it, but who would also be personally excited and motivated to do so. Another example. If we lost a big prospect, the whole organization needed to understand why, so that we could together fix the things that were broken in our products, marketing, and sales process. If I insisted on keeping the setbacks to myself, there was no way to jumpstart that process. Why it's imperative to tell it like it is. There are 3 key reasons why being transparent about your company's problems makes sense. 1. Trust. Without trust, communication breaks. More specifically, in any human interaction, the required amount of communication is inversely proportional to the level of trust. Consider the following. If I trust you completely, then I require no explanation or communication of your actions whatsoever, because I know that whatever you're doing is in my best interests. On the other hand, If I don't trust you at all, then no amount of talking, explaining, or reasoning will have any effect on me, because I do not trust that you are telling me the truth. In a company context, this is a critical point. As a company grows, communication becomes its biggest challenge. If the employees fundamentally trust the CEO, then communication will be vastly more efficient than if they don't. Telling things as they are is a critical part of building this trust. A CEO's ability to build this trust over time is often the difference between companies that execute well and companies that are chaotic. 2, the more brains working on the hard problems, the better. In order to build a great technology company, you have to hire lots of incredibly smart people. It's a total waste to have lots of big brains, but not let them work on your biggest problems. A brain, no matter how big, cannot solve a problem it doesn't know about. As the open source community would explain it, given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. 3, a good culture is like the old RIP routing protocol. Bad news travels fast. Good news travels slow. If you investigate companies that have failed, you'll find that many employees knew about the fatal issues long before those issues killed the company. If the employees knew about the deadly problems, why didn't they say something? Too often the answer is that the company culture discouraged the spread of bad news, so the knowledge lay dormant until it was too late to act. A healthy company culture encourages people to share bad news. A company that discusses its problems freely and openly can quickly solve them. A company that covers up its problems frustrates everyone involved. The resulting action item for CEOs: build a culture that rewards, not punishes, people for getting problems into the open where they can be solved. As a corollary, beware of management maxims that stop information from flowing freely in your company. For example, consider the old management standard: don't bring me a problem without bringing me a solution. What if the employee cannot solve an important problem? For example, what if an engineer identifies a serious flaw in the way the product is being marketed? Do you really want him to bury that information? Management truisms like these may be good for employees to aspire to in the abstract, but they can also be the enemy of free-flowing information, which may be critical for the health of the company. Final thought: if you run a company, you will experience overwhelming psychological pressure to be overly positive. Stand up to the pressure, face your fear, and tell it like it is. The right way to lay people off. Shortly after we sold Opsware to Hewlett-Packard, I had a conversation with the legendary venture capitalist Doug Leone of Sequoia Capital. He wanted to recount the story of how we went from doomed in the eyes of the world to a $1.6 billion outcome with no recapitalization. After I took him through the details, including several near bankruptcies, a stock price of 35 cents per share, unlimited bad press, and 3 separate layoffs where we lost a total of 400 employees, he was most amazed by the layoffs. During more than 20 years in the venture capital business, he'd never seen a company recover from consecutive layoffs and achieve a $1 billion-plus outcome. He confessed that he'd bet against that every time. Since my only experience was a great exception, I needed more information. I asked him why all the other startups failed. He replied that the layoffs inevitably broke the company's culture. After seeing their friends laid off, employees were no longer willing to make the requisite sacrifices needed to build a company. He said that although it was possible to survive an isolated layoff, it was hugely unlikely that a company would experience great success. Building a highly valuable business. He added, after 3 consecutive giant layoffs accompanied by horrible prominent press coverage, was a complete violation of the laws of venture capital physics. He wanted to know how we did it. After thinking about this question, here's my answer. In retrospect, we were able to keep cultural continuity and retain our best employees despite multiple massive layoffs because we laid people off the right way. This may sound nutty. How can you do something that's fundamentally wrong in the right way? Here's how. Step 1. Get your head right. When a company fails to hit its financial plan so severely that it must fire the employees it went a great time and expense to hire, it weighs heavily on the chief executive. During the first layoff at our company, I remember being forwarded an email exchange among a group of employees. In the exchange, one of our smarter employees wrote, "Ben is either lying or stupid or both. I remember reading that and thinking, definitely stupid. During a time like this, it is difficult to focus on the future because the past overwhelms you, but that's exactly what you must do. Step 2, don't delay. Once you decide that you will have to lay people off, the time elapsed between making that decision and executing that decision should be as short as possible. If word leaks, then you'll be faced with an additional set of issues. Employees will question managers and ask whether a layoff is coming. If the managers don't know, they will look stupid. If the managers do know, they will either have to lie to their employees, contribute to the leak, or remain silent, which will create additional agitation. At Loudcloud Opsware, we badly mismanaged this dynamic with our first round of layoffs, but sharply corrected things on the next two. Step 3. Be clear in your own mind about why you are laying people off. Going into a layoff, board members will sometimes try to make you feel better by putting a positive spin on things. They might say, "This gives us a great opportunity to deal with some performance issues and simplify the business." That may be true, but do not let that cloud your thinking or your message to the company. You are laying people off because the company failed to hit its plan. If individual performance were the only issue, then you'd be taking a different measure. Company performance failed. This distinction is critical because the message to the company and the laid-off individuals should not be, "This is great. We are cleaning up performance." The message must be, "The company failed, and in order to move forward, we will have to lose some excellent people." Admitting to the failure may not seem like a big deal, but trust me, it is. Trust me, that's what a CEO says every day to her employees. Trust me, this will be a good company. Trust me, this will be good for your career. Trust me, this will be good for your life. A layoff breaks that trust. In order to rebuild trust, you have to come clean. Step 4. Train your managers. The most important step in the whole exercise is training the management team. If you send managers into this super uncomfortable situation with no training, most of them will fail. Training starts with a golden rule. Managers must lay off their own people. They cannot pass the task to HR or to a more sadistic peer. You cannot hire an outsourcing firm like the one in the movie Up in the Air. Every manager must lay off his own people. Why so strict? Why can't the more confrontational managers just handle this task for everyone? Because people won't remember every day they work for your company, but they will surely remember the day you laid them off. They will remember every last detail about that day, and the details will matter greatly. The reputations of your company and your managers depend on you standing tall, facing the employees who trusted you and worked hard for you. If you hired me and I busted my ass working for you, I expect you to have the courage to lay me off yourself. Once you make it clear that managers must lay off their own people, be sure to prepare them for the task. 1. They should explain briefly what happened, and that it is a company rather than a personal failure. 2. They should be clear that the employee is impacted and that the decision is non-negotiable. 3. They should be fully prepared with all of the details about the benefits and support the company plans to provide. Step 5. Address the entire company. Prior to executing the layoff, the CEO must address the company. The CEO must deliver the overall message that provides the proper context and air cover for the managers. If you do your job right, the managers will have a much easier time doing their jobs. Keep in mind what former Intuit CEO Bill Campbell told me. The message is for the people who are staying. The people who stay will care deeply about how you treat their colleagues. Many of the people whom you lay off will have closer relationships with the people who stay than you do, so treat them with the appropriate level of respect. Still, the company must move forward, so be careful not to apologize too much. Step 6. Be visible, be present. After you make the speech telling your company that you'll be letting many of them go, you will not feel like hanging out and talking to people. You will probably feel like going to a bar and drinking a fifth of tequila. Do not do this. Be present. Be visible. Be engaging. People want to see you. They want to see whether you care. The people whom you laid off will want to know if they still have a relationship with you and the company. Talk to people. Help them carry their things to their cars. Let them know that you appreciate their efforts. Preparing to fire an executive. When you recruit an executive, you paint a beautiful picture of her future in your company. You describe in great depth and in vibrant color how awesome it will be for her to accept your offer and how much better it will be than joining that other company. Then one day you realize you must fire her. Reconcile that, Ms. CEO. It turns out that the actual act of firing an executive can be relatively easy compared with any other firing. Executives have experience being on the other side of the conversation and tend to be quite professional. Firing an executive correctly is a bit more complicated and extremely important. If you do not learn the right lessons, you will be doing it again soon. Like so many things, the key to correctly firing an executive is preparation. Here is a 4-step process that will treat the executive fairly and improve your company. Step 1. Root cause analysis. While it's possible to fire an executive for bad behavior, incompetence, or laziness, those cases are rare and relatively easy. Unfortunately, unless you have a horribly deficient hiring process, those are probably not the reasons why you got to this point. At this level, almost every company screens for the proper skill set, motivation, and track record. Yes, the reason that you have to fire your head of marketing is not because he sucks, it's because you suck. In other words, the wrong way to view an executive firing is as an executive failure. The correct way to view an executive firing is as an interview integration process system failure. Therefore, the first step to properly firing an executive is figuring out why you hired the wrong person for your company. You may have blown it for a variety of reasons. You did a poor job defining the position in the first place. If you don't know what you want, you will be unlikely to get it. Far too often, CEOs hire executives based on an abstract notion of what they think and feel the executive should be like. This error often leads to the executive not bringing the key, necessary qualities to the table. You hired for lack of weakness rather than for strengths. This is especially common when you run a consensus-based hiring process. The group will often find the candidate's weaknesses, but they won't place a high enough value on the areas where you need the executive to be a world-class performer. As a result, you hire an executive with no sharp weaknesses, but who is mediocre where you need her to be great. If you don't have world-class strengths where you need them, you won't be a world-class company. You hired for scale too soon. The most consistently wrong advice that venture capitalists and executive recruiters give CEOs is to hire someone bigger than required. Think about the next 3 to 5 years and how you'll be a large company is how the bad advice usually sounds. It's great to hire people who can run a large-scale organization if you have one. It's also great to hire people who know how to grow an organization very fast if you are ready to grow your organization very fast. However, if you do not or you are not, then you need someone who can do the job for the next 18 months. If you hire someone who will be great in 18 months but will be poor for the next 18 months, the company will reject her before she ever gets a chance to show her stuff. Your other employees will wonder, why did we give her all those stock options when she's not contributing anything? Those kinds of questions are impossible to recover from. It turns out that venture capitalists and executive recruiters are not stupid. They just learned the wrong lessons from previous failures. To learn the right lesson, see the special case of scaling and the special case of fast growth as explained below. You hired for the generic position. There is no such thing as a great CEO, a great head of marketing, or a great head of sales. There's only a great head of sales for your company for the next 12 to 24 months. That position is not the same as the same position at Microsoft or Facebook. Don't look for the candidate out of central casting. This is not a movie. The executive had the wrong kind of ambition. In Chapter 6, I will describe the difference between ambition for the company and ambition for oneself. If an executive has the wrong kind of ambition, then despite her skills, the company may reject her. You failed to integrate the executive. Bringing a new person into your company in an important role is difficult. Other employees will be quick to judge. Her expectations may be different from yours, and the job may be largely undefined. Be sure to review and improve your integration plan after you fire an executive. The special case of scaling. A fairly common reason for firing an executive is that when the company quadruples in size, the executive no longer does a job effectively at the new size. The reason is that when a company multiplies in size, the management jobs become brand new jobs. As a result, everybody needs to requalify for the new job because the new job and the old job are not the same. Running a 200-person global sales organization is not the same job as running a 25-person local sales team. If you get lucky, the person you hire to run the 25-person team will have learned how to run the 200-person team. If not, you need to hire the right person for the new job. This is neither an executive failure nor a system failure. It is life in the big city. Do not attempt to avoid this phenomenon, as you will only make things worse. The special case of fast growth. If you build a great product and the market wants it, you will find yourself needing to grow your company extremely quickly. Nothing will ensure your success like hiring the right executive who has grown an organization like yours very quickly and successfully before. Note that this is not the same as inheriting a very large organization or working your way up to running a very large organization. Make sure you hire the right kind of fast growth executive. Also, do not hire this person if you are not ready to give them lots of budget to grow their organization. Expect them to do what they do. The successful fast growth executive is so important to building successful startups that recruiters and venture capitalists often advise CEOs to bring them in before the company is ready. Once you identify the problem, then you create the basis for the next steps. Step 2, informing the board. Informing the board is tricky and many issues can further complicate the task. This is the 5th or 6th executive that you had to fire. This is the 3rd executive that you fired in this role. The candidate was referred by a board member who recommended the executive as a superstar. Realize that in any of these cases the board will be at least somewhat alarmed, and there is nothing that you can do about that. But keep in mind that your choices are alarm the board or enable an ineffective executive to remain in her position. While choice is not great, it's a heck of a lot better than choice. Leaving a failing leader in place will cause an entire department in your company to slowly rot. Let that happen, and the board will be more than alarmed. You should have 3 goals with the board. Get their support and understanding for the difficult task that you will execute. You should start by making sure that they understand the root cause and your plan to remedy the situation. This will give them confidence in your ability to hire and manage outside executives in the future. Get their input and approval for the separation package. This will be critical for the next step. Executive packages are larger than regular severance packages, and rightly so. It takes about 10 times longer for an executive to find a new job than it does for an individual contributor. Preserve the reputation of the fired executive. The failure was very likely a team effort, and it's best to portray it that way. You don't make yourself look good by trashing someone who worked for you. A mature approach to this issue will help keep the board confident in your ability to be CEO. It's also the fair and decent thing to do. Finally, firing an executive turns out to be a piece of news that's handled better with individual phone calls than in dramatic fashion during a board meeting. It takes a bit longer, but it's well worth the effort. Individual conversations will be particularly important if one of the board members introduce the executive to the company. Once everyone agrees individually, you can finalize the details in a board meeting or call. Step 3, preparing for the conversation. After you know what went wrong and have informed the board, you should tell the executive as quickly as possible. In preparation for that meeting, I recommend scripting or rehearsing what you plan to say so that you do not misspeak. The executive will remember the conversation for a very long time, so you need to get it right. As part of your preparation, you should review any performance reviews or written performance conversations to understand any inconsistencies in your prior communication. 3 keys to getting it right. 1. Be clear on the reasons. You have thought about this long and hard. Don't equivocate or sugarcoat it. You owe it to them to be clear about what you think happened. 2. Use decisive language. Do not leave a discussion open-ended. This is not a performance review. It's a firing. Use words and phrases like, I have decided rather than I think. 3. Have the severance package approved and ready Once the executive hears the news, she will stop caring about the company and its issues. She will be highly focused on herself and her family. Be ready to provide specific details of the severance package. Finally, the executive will be keenly interested in how the news will be communicated to the company and to the outside world. It is best to let her decide. Bill Campbell once gave me a critical bit of advice when I was preparing to fire an executive. He said, "Ben, you cannot let him keep his job, but you absolutely can let him keep his respect." Step 4. Preparing the company communication. After you have informed the executive, you must quickly update the company and your staff on the change. The correct order for informing the company is 1. The executive's direct reports, because they will be most impacted. 2. The other members of your staff, because they will need to answer questions about it. And 3. The rest of the company. All of these communications should happen on the same day and preferably within a couple of hours. When disclosing the firing to the direct reports, make sure that you have a plan for whom they will report to in the meantime and what's next. Generally, it's smart for the CEO to act in the executive role in the meanwhile. If you do act the role, you must really act staff meetings, one-on-ones, objective setting, etc. doing. So it will provide excellent continuity for the team and greatly inform your thinking on whom to hire next. As you did when you updated the board, keep the message positive and refrain from throwing the executive under the bus. The best employees in the organization will likely be the ones closest to the executive. If you trash her, you'll put all her best employees on notice that they are next. Is that a message you want to send? When you update the company, you might worry about employees misinterpreting the news and thinking the company is in trouble. Do not try to maneuver around such a reaction. When you expect your employees to act like adults, they generally do. If you treat them like children, then get ready for your company to turn into one big Barney episode. In the end, every CEO likes to say she runs a great company. It's hard to tell whether the claim is true until the company or the CEO has to do something really difficult. Firing an executive is a good test. Demoting a loyal friend. When I started Loudcloud, I hired the best people I knew, people whom I respected, trusted, and liked. Like me, many of them did not have deep experience in the jobs that I gave them, but they worked night and day to learn, and they made great contributions to the company. Nevertheless, the day came when I needed to hire someone else, someone with more experience, to run the function that I had previously entrusted to my loyal friend. Damn, how do you do that? Should you do it at all? The first question that always comes to mind is, do I really need to do this? Who could I possibly hire who will work this hard and bleed the company colors like this? Sadly, if you're asking the question, you very likely already know the answer. If you need to build a worldwide sales organization, your buddy who did the first few deals is almost certainly not the best choice. As hard as it may be, you need to take a Confucian approach. You must consider first all the other employees and second your friend. The good of the individual must be sacrificed for the good of the whole. How do you break the news? Once you make the decision, breaking the news will not be easy. It's important to consider 2 deep emotions your friend will feel. Embarrassment. Do not underestimate what a large factor this will be in his thinking. All of his friends, relatives, and colleagues know his current position. They know how hard he's worked and how much he's sacrificed for the company. How will he possibly explain to them that he will no longer be part of the executive team? Betrayal. Your friend will undoubtedly feel something like this. I've been there from the beginning. I've worked side by side with you. How could you do this? It's not like you're perfect in your job, either. How can you be so comfortable selling me out? Those are some powerful emotions, so get ready for an intense discussion. Ironically, the key to an emotional discussion is to take the emotion out of it. To do that, you must be very clear in your mind about what you decided and what you want to do. The most important thing to decide is that you really want to do this. If you walk into a demotion discussion with an open decision, you will walk out with a mess of situation and a mess of a relationship. As part of the decision, you must get comfortable with the thought that the employee may quit the company. Given the intense emotions he will feel, there's no guarantee that he will want to stay. If you cannot afford to lose him, You cannot make this change. Finally, you must decide the best role for him in your company. The obvious thing is to have him continue under his new boss, but this may not be the best thing for him, his boss, or his career. Your loyal employee will continue to have lots of knowledge about your company, competition, customers, and market that his new boss lacks. On the one hand, this can be a good thing. He can help get the new boss up to speed. On the other hand, when mixed with the intense emotions of embarrassment and betrayal, you might end up with a sabotage cocktail. Another problem with this approach is that from a career path perspective, there is no way to paint a picture of him reporting to his new boss as anything but a demotion. An alternative, if appropriate, would be to move him to another area of the company where his skills, talent, and knowledge will help. This kind of move will give him a chance to develop a new set of skills and help the company while he's doing it. For young employees, getting experience in different areas can be highly valuable. Sadly, this option may not be a silver bullet. He might not want to work in another job. He might be hell-bent on keeping his current job. So prepare for that as well. Once you decide to hire someone above your friend and decided on alternatives that you'd like to offer him, you can have the conversation. Keep in mind that you cannot let him keep his old job, but you can be fair and you can be honest. Some keys to doing that. Use appropriate language. Make clear with your language that you've decided. As previously discussed, use phrases like, I have decided rather than I think or I'd like. By doing this, you will avoid putting the employee in the awkward position of wondering whether he should lobby for his old job. You can't tell him what he wants to hear, but you can be honest. Admit reality. If you are a founder CEO like I was, it probably won't be lost on the employee that you are just as underskilled for your job as he is for his. Don't dodge this fact. In fact, admit that if you were a more experienced CEO, you might be able to develop him into the role, but two people who don't know what they are doing is a recipe for failure. Acknowledge the contributions. If you want him to stay in the company, you should say that and make it crystal clear that you want to help him develop his career and contribute to the company. Let him know that you appreciate what he's done and that your decision results from a forward-looking examination of what the company needs, not a review of his past performance. The best way to do this, if appropriate, is to couple the emotion with an increase in compensation. Doing so will let him know that he's both appreciated and valued going forward. Through all of this, keep in mind that it is what it is and nothing you can say will change that or stop it from being deeply upsetting. Your goal should not be to take the sting out of it, but to be honest, clear, and effective. Your friend may not appreciate that in the moment, but he will appreciate it over time. Lies that losers tell. When a company starts to lose its major battles, the truth often becomes the first casualty. CEOs and employees work tirelessly to develop creative narratives that help them avoid dealing with the obvious facts. Despite their intense creativity, many companies often end up with the same false explanations. Some familiar lies. She left, but we were going to fire her or give her a bad performance review. High-tech companies tend to track employee attrition in 3 categories. 1. People who quit. 2. People who got fired. 3. People who quit, but it's okay because the company didn't want them anyway. Fascinatingly, as companies begin to struggle, the 3rd category always seems to grow much faster than the first. In addition, the sudden wave of semi-performance-related attrition usually happens in companies that claim to have a super high talent bar. How do all these superstar employees suddenly go from great to crap? How is it possible that when you lose a top-rated employee before you can say unwanted attrition, the manager carefully explains how her performance fell off? We would have won, but the other guys gave the deal away. The customer selected us technically and thinks we're the better company, but our competitor just gave the product away. We would never sell so cheaply as it would hurt our reputation. Anybody who has ever run an enterprise sales force has heard this lie before. You go into an account, you fight hard, and you lose. The sales rep, not wanting to shine the light on himself, blames the used car dealer rep from the other company. The CEO, not wanting to believe that she's losing product competitiveness, believes the rep if you hear this lie. Try to validate the claim with the actual customer. I'll bet you can't. Just because we miss the intermediate milestones doesn't mean we won't hit our product schedule. In engineering meetings where there is great pressure to ship on time, a customer commitment, a quarter that depends on it, or a competitive imperative, everybody hopes for good news. When the facts don't align with the good news, a clever manager will find a narrative to make everybody feel better until the next meeting. We have a very high churn rate, but as soon as we turn on email marketing to our user base, people will come back. Yes, of course. The reason that people leave our service and don't come back is that we have not been sending them enough spam. That makes total sense to me, too. Where do lies come from? To answer that question, I thought back to a conversation I had years ago with the incomparable Andy Grove. Back at the tail end of the great internet bubble in 2001, as all the big technology companies began missing their quarters by giant amounts, I found myself wondering how none of them saw it coming. One would think that after the dot-com crash of April 2000, companies like Cisco, Siebel, and HP would realize that they would soon face a slowdown as many of their customers hit the wall. But despite perhaps the most massive and public early warning system ever, each CEO reiterated strong guidance right up to the point where they dramatically whiffed their quarters. I asked Andy why these great CEOs would lie about their impending fate. He said they were not lying to investors, but rather they were lying to themselves. Andy explained that humans, particularly those who build things, only listen to leading indicators of good news. For example, if a CEO hears that engagement for her application increased an incremental 25% beyond the normal growth rate 1 month, she will be off to the races hiring more engineers to keep up with the impending tidal wave of demand. On the other hand, if engagement decreases 25%, she will be equally intense and urgent in explaining away. The site was slow that month, there were 4 holidays, and we made a UI change that caused all the problems. For gosh sakes, let's not panic. Both leading indicators may have been wrong, or both may have been right, but our hypothetical CEO, like almost every other CEO, only took action on the positive indicator and only looked for alternative explanations on the negative leading indicator. If this advice sounds too familiar, and you find yourself wondering why your honest employees are lying to you, the answer is they are not. They are lying to themselves. And if you believe them, you are lying to yourself. Lead bullets. Early in my tenure at Netscape, when we realized that Microsoft's new web server had every feature that ours had, but was also 5 times faster and was to be given away for free, I immediately went to work trying to pivot our server product line to something that we could sell for money. The late, great Mike Homer and I worked furiously on a set of partnerships and acquisitions that would broaden the product line and surround the web server with enough functionality that we would be able to survive the attack. I excitedly reviewed the plan with my engineering counterpart, Bill Turpin, who looked at me as though I were a little kid who had much to learn. Bill was a long-time veteran of battling Microsoft from his time at Borland and understood what I was trying to do, but he was not persuaded. He said, "Ben, those silver bullets that you and Mike are looking for are fine and good, but our web server is 5 times slower. There is no silver bullet that's going to fix that. No, we're going to have to use a lot of lead bullets." Oh snap. As a result of Bill's advice, we focused our engineering team on fixing the performance issues while working on the other things in the background. We eventually beat Microsoft's performance and grew the server line to become a $400 million business, and we would never have done it without those lead bullets. I carried that lesson with me for many years. 6 years later, when I was CEO of Opsware, our toughest competitor, BladeLogic, started to consistently beat us in large deals. We were a public company, and the losses were all too visible. To make matters worse, we needed to win those deals in order to beat Wall Street's projections. So the company felt tremendous pressure. Many of our smartest people came to me with ideas for avoiding the battle. Let's build a lightweight version of the product and go down market. Let's acquire a company with a simpler architecture. Let's focus on service providers. All these approaches reinforced to me was that we weren't facing a market problem. The customers were buying. They just weren't buying our product. This was not a time to pivot. So I said the same thing to every one of them. There are no silver bullets for this. only lead bullets. They did not want to hear that, but it made things clear. We had to build a better product. There was no other way out. No window, no hole, no escape hatch, no back door. We had to go through the front door and deal with the big, ugly guy blocking it. Lead bullets. After 9 months of hard work on an extremely rugged product cycle, we regained our product lead and eventually built a company that was worth $1.6 billion. Without the lead bullets, I suspect we would have ended at about 1/10 that value. There may be nothing scarier in business than facing an existential threat. So scary that many in the organization will do anything to avoid facing it. They will look for any alternative, any way out, any excuse not to live or die in a single battle. I see this often in startup pitches. The conversations go something like this. Entrepreneur, we have the best product in the market by far. All the customers love it and prefer it to competitor X. Me, why does competitor X have 5 times your revenue? Entrepreneur, we are using partners and OEMs because we can't build a direct channel like competitor X. Me, why not? If you have the better product, why not knuckle up and go to war? Entrepreneur, me, stop looking for the silver bullet. There comes a time in every company's life where it must fight for its life. If you find yourself running when you should be fighting, you need to ask yourself, if our company isn't good enough to win, then do we need to exist at all? Nobody cares. Just win, baby. Al Davis. Back in those bad old days at Loudcloud, I often thought to myself, how could I have possibly prepared for this? How could I know that half our customers would go out of business? How could I know that it would become impossible to raise money in the private markets? How could I have figured out that there would be 221 IPOs in 2019 and 2001? Could anybody expect me to achieve a reasonable outcome given those circumstances? As I was feeling sorry for myself, I randomly watched an interview with famous football coach Bill Parcells. He was telling the story of how he had a similar dilemma when he began his head coaching career. In his very first season, Parcells' team, the New York Giants, was hit with a rash of injuries. He worried incessantly about the impact of the injuries on his team's fortunes, as it is difficult enough to win with your best players, let alone a bunch of substitutes. When his friend and mentor, Raiders owner Al Davis, called Parcells to check in, Parcells relayed his injury issues. Parcells, Al, I am just not sure how we can win without so many of our best players. What should I do? Davis, Bill, nobody cares, just coach your team. That might be the best CEO advice ever. Because, you see, nobody cares. When things go wrong in your company, nobody cares. The media don't care, your investors don't care, your board doesn't care, your employees don't care, and even your mama doesn't care. Nobody cares. And they are right not to care. A great reason for failing won't preserve $1 for your investors, won't save one employee's job, or get you one new customer. It especially won't make you feel one bit better when you shut down your company and declare bankruptcy. All the mental energy you use to elaborate your misery would be far better used try and find the one seemingly impossible way out of your current mess. Spend 0 time on what you could have done and devote all of your time on what you might do. Because in the end, nobody cares. Just run your company. Chapter 5. Take care of the people, the products, and the profits. In that order. I roll with the hardest niggas. Make money with the smartest niggas. I ain't got time for you fucking artists. Niggas better shut your trap before you become a target nigga. Y'all army brats, I'm the motherfucking sergeant nigga. The game. Scream on them. Once we pushed the Opsware stock price back above $1, the next problem was to rebuild the executive team. We had cloud services executives, but now we were a software company and needed software executives. In enterprise software companies, the 2 most important positions tend to be VP of Sales and VP of Engineering. Initially, I'd attempted to take the VP of Professional Services from Loudcloud and make him the VP of Sales. That didn't work. The next set of sales would be the 4th one hired since we had founded the company 3 years earlier, not a great track record. More important, The next mistake I made on a sales leader would be my last. The marketplace, not to mention Wall Street investors, did not leave me with much rope. To better prepare for the hire this time, I decided in the interim to run sales myself. I managed a team, ran the forecast calls, and was the one person responsible for the revenue number for Opsware. I'd learned the hard way that when hiring executives, one should follow Colin Powell's instructions and hire for strength rather than lack of weakness. By running sales, I understood very clearly the strengths we needed. I made a careful list and set out to find the sales executives with the right skills and talents for Opsware. After interviewing about 24 candidates, none of whom had the strengths I sought, I interviewed Mark Cranny. He was what I expected. He didn't fit the stereotype of a hard-charging sales executive. For starters, Mark was average height, whereas most sales executives tend to be rather tall. Next, he was a square guy, that is, he was as wide as he was tall. Not fat, just square. His square body seemed to fit rather uncomfortably into what must have been a custom-tailored suit. There is no way an off-the-rack business suit would fit a square guy like Mark. And then I looked at his resume. The first thing I noticed was that he went to school that I'd never heard of, Southern Utah University. I asked him what kind of school it was. He replied, it was the MIT of Southern Utah. That was the last joke he told. Mark's seriousness was so intense that it seemed to make him uncomfortable in his own skin. He made me uncomfortable, too. Ordinarily, that vibe would rule out a candidate for me, but the strengths that I needed were so critical to the business that I was willing to overlook every weakness. One interview technique that I'd used to sort the good from the bad was to ask a series of questions about hiring, training, and managing sales reps typically. It would go like this, Ben, what do you look for in a sales rep? Candidate. They need to be smart, aggressive, and competitive. They need to know how to do complex deals and navigate organizations. Ben, how do you test those things in an interview? Candidate. Well, I hire everybody out of my network. Ben, okay, once you get them on board, what do you expect from them? Candidate. I expect them to understand and follow the sales process. I expect them to master product. I expect them to be accurate in their forecasting. Ben, tell me about the training program that you designed to achieve this. Candidate. They would then proceed to make something up as they went along. Mark gave a profile and interview questions. And then I asked him the training question. I'll never forget the pained look that came across his face. He looked like he wanted to get up and leave the interview right then and there. I felt like offering him an aspirin or maybe some Abilify. His reaction surprised me, because he'd done such an excellent job up to that point. I later realized that for me to ask Mark Cranny to describe the proper way to train sales reps was like a layman asking Isaac Newton to explain the laws of physics. Where to begin? After what seemed like 5 minutes of silence, Mark reached into his bag and pulled out a giant training manual he had designed. He said he couldn't possibly explain what I needed to know about training in the time we had left, but if I wanted to schedule a follow-up meeting, he would explain the nuances of training salespeople to be a lead across a broad set of disciplines, including process, products, and organizational selling. He explained further that even with all those things, a successful sales leader still must inspire courage in team. He sounded like General Patton. I knew I had my guy. Unfortunately, nobody else knew that. Every member of the executive staff and every member of the board of directors voted thumbs down on Mark Cranny. When I asked Bill Campbell what he thought, he said, I won't lay down on the railroad tracks to stop you from hiring Cranny. That wasn't the ringing endorsement I was looking for. The reasons for voting no never refer to Mark's lack of strength, but rather to his abundance of weakness. Mark went to Southern Utah. Mark made people feel uncomfortable. Mark did not look like a head of sales. Still, the more time I spent with him, the more I knew he was the one. In talking with him for an hour, I'd learned more about sales than I had in 6 months running sales. He would even call me with details about deals my sales team was competing for, deals my own sales reps didn't seem to know about. It was like he had his own sales FBI. I decided to take a stand. I told my team and the board that I understood their concerns. But I still wanted to move forward with Mark and planned to proceed with reference checks. When I asked Mark for his references, he surprised me again. He gave me a list of 75 references. He said he had more if I needed them. I called every reference on the list, and everyone called me back within 1 hour. Mark ran a tight network. Maybe these references were the sales FBI. Then, just as I was getting ready to make the hire, another executive on my team called to say that a friend of hers knew Mark Cranny and wanted to give a negative reference. I called a friend, I'll call him Joe, and proceeded to have the most unusual reference call of my career. Ben, thanks very much for reaching out. Joe, my pleasure. Ben, how you know Mark Cranny? Joe, Mark was an area vice president when I taught sales training at my previous employer. I want to tell you that under no circumstances should you hire Mark Cranny. Ben, wow, that's a strong statement. Is he a criminal? Joe, no, I've never known Mark to do anything unethical. Ben, is he bad at hiring? Joe, no, he brought some of the best salespeople into the company. Ben, can he do big deals? Joe, yes, definitely. Mark did some of the largest deals we had. Ben, is he a bad manager? Joe, no, he was very effective at running his team. Ben, well, then why shouldn't I hire him? Joe, he'll be a terrible cultural fit. Ben, please explain. Joe, well, when I was teaching new hire sales training at Parametric Technology Corporation, I brought in Mark as a guest speaker to fire up the troops. We had 50 new hires, and I had them all excited about selling and enthusiastic about working for the company. Mark Cranny walks up to the podium, looks at the crowd of fresh new recruits, and says, I don't give a fuck how well trained you are. If you don't bring me $500,000 a quarter, I'm putting a bullet in your head. Ben, thank you very much. The world looks one way in peacetime, but very different when you must fight for your life every day. In times of peace, one has time to care about things like appropriateness, long-term cultural consequences, and people's feelings. In times of war, killing the enemy and getting the troops safely home is all that counts. I was at war, and I needed a wartime general. I needed Mark Cranny. As a final step in making the hire, I needed to explain it to Mark Andreessen. As co-founder and chairman of the board, Mark's opinion mattered deeply to the board, and Mark was still uncomfortable with Cranny. Mark trusted me enough that he would let me make the hire whether he liked the candidate or not, but it was important to me that Mark be fully on board. I let Mark open the conversation, because despite consistently being the smartest person in the room, and possibly the world, Mark is so humble that he never believes that other people think he is smart, which makes him sensitive to being ignored. He opened the conversation by listing his issues with Cranny. Doesn't look or sound like a head of sales. Went to a weak school. Makes him uncomfortable. I listened very carefully and replied, I agree with every single one of those issues. However, Mark Cranny is a sales savant. He has mastered sales to a level that far exceeds anybody that I have ever known. If he didn't have the things wrong with him that you enumerated, he wouldn't be willing to join a company that just traded at 35 cents per share. He'd be CEO of IBM. Mark's reply came quickly. Got it. Let's hire him. And that's how I took the key step in building a world-class software team out of the Loudcloud rubble. As I got to know Mark over the years, everything that I learned in the interview and the reference check proved out. He wasn't an easy cultural fit, but he was a genius. I needed his genius and worked with him on the fit. I don't know that every member of the team ever became totally comfortable with Mark, but in the end they all agreed that he was the best person possible for the job. My old boss Jim Barksdale was fond of saying, we take care of the people, the products, and the profits in that order. It's a simple saying, but it's deep. Taking care of the people is the most difficult of the three by far, and if you don't do it, the other two won't matter. Taking care of the people means that your company is a good place to work. Most workplaces are far from good. As organizations grow large, important work can go unnoticed. The hardest workers can get passed over by the best politicians, and bureaucratic processes can choke out the creativity and remove all the joy. When everything went wrong from the dot-com crash to NASDAQ, threatening to delist the company, the thing that saved us were the techniques developed in this chapter. If your company is a good place to work, you too may live long enough to find your glory. A good place to work. At Opsware, I used to teach a management expectations course because I deeply believed in training. I made it clear that I expected every manager to meet with her people on a regular basis. I even gave instructions on how to conduct a one-on-one meeting, so there could be no excuses. Then one day, while I happily went about my job, it came to my attention that one of my managers hadn't had a one-on-one meeting with any of his employees in more than 6 months. While I knew to expect what I inspect, I did not expect this. No one-on-one in more than 6 months? How was it possible for me to invest so much time thinking about management, preparing materials, and personally training my managers, and then get no one-on-ones for 6 months? Wow! So much for CEO authority. If that's how the managers listen to me, then why do I even bother coming to work? I thought that leading by example would be the sure way to get the company to do what I wanted. Lord knows the company picked up all of my bad habits, so why didn't they pick up my good habits? Had I lost a team? I recalled a conversation I'd had with my father many years ago regarding Tommy Heinsohn, the Boston Celtics basketball coach at the time. Heinsohn had been one of the most successful coaches in the world, including being named Coach of the Year and winning 2 NBA championships. However, he had gone downhill fast and now had the worst record in the league. I asked my father what happened. He said, the players stopped paying attention to his temper tantrums. Heinsohn used to yell at the team, and they'd respond. Now, they just ignore him. Was the team now ignoring me? Had I yelled at them one time too many? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that while I had told the team what to do, I had not been clear about why I wanted them to do it. Clearly, my authority alone was not enough to get them to do what I wanted. Given the large number of things that we were trying to accomplish, managers couldn't get at everything and came up with their own priorities. Apparently, this manager didn't think that meeting with his people was all that important, and I hadn't explained to him why it was so important. So, why did I force every manager through management training? Why did I demand that managers have one-on-ones with employees? After much deliberation with myself, I settled on an articulation of the core reason, and I called up the offending manager's boss, I'll call him Steve, and told him that I needed to see him right away. When Steve came into my office, I asked him a question. Steve, do you know why I came to work today? Steve, what do you mean, Ben? Me, why did I bother waking up? Why did I bother coming in? If it was about the money, couldn't I sell the company tomorrow and have more money than I ever wanted? I don't want to be famous. In fact, just the opposite. Steve, I guess. Me, well, then why did I come to work? Steve, I don't know. Me, well, let me explain. I came to work because it's personally very important to me that Opsware be a good company. It's important to me that the people who spend 12 to 16 hours a day here, which is most of their waking life, have a good life. It's why I come to work. Steve, okay. Me, do you know the difference between a good place to work and a bad place to work? Steve, I think so. Me, what is the difference? Steve, well, me, let me break it down for you. In good organizations, people can focus on their work and have confidence that if they get their work done, good things will happen for both the company and them personally. It is a true pleasure to work in an organization such as this. Every person can wake up knowing that the work they do will be efficient, effective, and make a difference for the organization and themselves. These things make their jobs both motivating and fulfilling. In a poor organization, on the other hand, people spend much of their time fighting organizational boundaries, infighting, and broken processes. They are not even clear on what their jobs are, so there is no way to know if they're getting the job done or not. In a miracle case that they work ridiculous hours and get the job done, they have no idea what it means for the company or their careers. To make it all much worse and rub salt in the wound, when they finally work up the courage to tell management how fucked up their situation is, management denies there's a problem, then defends the status quo, then ignores the problem. Steve. Okay. Me. Are you aware that your manager Tim has not met with any of his employees in the past 6 months? Steve. No. Me. Now that you are aware, do you realize that there is no possible way for him to even be informed as to whether or not his organization is good or bad? Steve. Yes. Me. In summary, you and Tim are preventing me from achieving my one and only goal. You have become a barrier blocking me from achieving my most important goal. As a result, if Tim doesn't meet with each one of his employees in the next 24 hours, I will have no choice but to fire him and to fire you. Are we clear? Steve, Crystal, was that really necessary? You might argue that no matter how well managed a company is, it will fail without product market fit. You might argue further that horribly managed companies that achieve massive product market fit succeed just fine. And you would be right on both accounts. So was it really necessary for me to make such a dramatic speech and threaten one of my executives? I think it was for the following 3 reasons. Being a good company doesn't matter when things go well, but it can be the difference between life and death when things go wrong. Things always go wrong. Being a good company is an end in itself. The difference between life and death. When things go well, the reasons to stay at a company are many. Your career path is wide open because as the company grows, lots of interesting jobs naturally open up. Your friends and family think you are a genius for choosing to work at the company before anyone else knew it was it. Your resume gets stronger by working at a blue chip company in its heyday. Oh, and you're getting rich. When things go poorly, all those reasons become reasons to leave. In fact, the only thing that keeps an employee at a company when things go horribly wrong, other than needing a job, is that she likes her job. Things always go wrong. There has never been a company in the history of the world that had a monotonously increasing stock price. In bad companies, when the economics disappear, so do the employees. In technology companies, when the employees disappear, the spiral begins. The company declines in value. The best employees leave. The company declines in value. The best employees leave. Spirals are extremely difficult to reverse. Being a good company is an end in itself. When I first met Bill Campbell, he was chairman of Intuit, on the board of Apple, and a mentor to many of the top CEOs in the industry. However, those things did not impress me nearly as much as his time running Go Corporation back in 1992. The company raised more money than almost any other venture capital-backed startup in history and lost nearly all of it before selling itself for nearly nothing to AT&T in 1994. Now that probably doesn't sound impressive. In fact, it probably sounds like a horrible failure. But I'd met dozens of Go employees in my career, including great people like Mike Homer, Danny Shader, Frank Chun, and Stratton Sklavos. The amazing thing was that every one of those Geo employees counted Go as one of the greatest work experiences of their lives. The best work experience ever, despite the fact that their careers stood still, they made no money, and they were front-page failures. Go was a good place to work. This made me realize what an amazingly effective CEO Bill was. Apparently, John Doerr thought that too, because when Scott Cook needed a CEO for Intuit, John recommended Bill even though Bill lost a ton of John's money at Go. And for years, everyone who ever came into contact with Go employees knew what Bill was about. He was about building good companies. If you do nothing else, be like Bill and build a good company. Why startups should train their people. I learned about why startups should train their people when I worked at Netscape. People at McDonald's get trained for their positions, but people with far more complicated jobs don't. It makes no sense. Would you want to stand on the line of the untrained person at McDonald's? Would you want to use the software written by the engineer who was never told how the rest of the code worked? A lot of companies think their employees are so smart that they require no training. That's silly. When I first became a manager, I had mixed feelings about training. Logically, training for high-tech companies made sense, but my personal experience with training programs at the companies where I had worked was underwhelming. The courses were taught by outside firms who didn't really understand our business and were teaching things that weren't relevant. Then I read Chapter 16 of Andy Grove's management classic, High Output Management, titled, Why Training is the Boss's Job. and it changed my career. Grove wrote, "Most managers seem to feel that training employees is a job that should be left to others. I, on the other hand, strongly believe that the manager should do it himself." When I was director of product management at Netscape, I was feeling frustrated by how little value most product managers added to the business. Based on Andy's guidance, I wrote a short document called Good Product Manager, Bad Product Manager, which I used to train the team on my basic expectations. I was shocked by what happened next. The performance of my team instantly improved. Product managers whom I had almost written off as hopeless became effective. Pretty soon, I was managing the highest performing team in the company. Based on this experience, after starting Loudcloud, I heavily invested in training. I credit that investment with much of our eventual success. And the whole thing started with a simple decision to train my people and an even simpler training document. So, I will now pay for my debt to Andy Grove and explain why, what, and how you should do the same in your company. Why you should train your people. Almost everyone who builds a technology company knows that people are the most important asset. Properly run startups place a great deal of emphasis on recruiting and the interview process in order to build their talent base. Too often investment in people stops there. There are 4 core reasons why it shouldn't. 1. Productivity. I often see startups keep careful statistics of how many candidates they've screened, how many have made it to the full interview process, and how many people they've hired. All of these statistics are interesting, but the most important statistic is missing. How many fully productive employees have they added? By failing to measure progress toward the actual goal, they lose sight of the value of training. If they measured productivity, they might be horrified to find that all those investments in recruiting, hiring, and integration were going to waste. Even if they were made aware of low productivity among new employees, most CEOs think that they don't have time to invest in training. Andy Grove does the math and shows that the opposite is true. Training is, quite simply, one of the highest leverage activities a manager can perform. Consider for a moment the possibility of your putting on a series of 4 lectures for members of your department. Let's count on 3 hours preparation for each hour of course time, 12 hours of work in total. Say that you have 10 students in your class. Next year, they will work a total of about 20,000 hours for your organization. If your training efforts result in a 1% improvement in your subordinate's performance, your company will gain the equivalent of 200 hours of work as the result of the expenditure of your 12 hours. 2. Performance management. When people interview managers, they often like to ask, "Have you fired anyone?" Or, "How many people have you fired?" Or, "How would you go about firing someone?" These are all fine questions, but often the right question is the one that isn't asked. When you fired the person, how did you know with certainty that the employee both understood the expectations of the job and was still missing them? The best answer is that the manager clearly set expectations when she trained the employee for the job. If you don't train your people, you establish no basis for performance management. As a result, performance management in your company will be sloppy and inconsistent. 3. Product quality. Often founders start companies with visions of elegant, beautiful product architectures that will solve so many of the nasty issues that they were forced to deal with in their previous jobs. Then, as their company becomes successful, they find that their beautiful product architecture has turned into a Frankenstein. How does this happen? As success drives the need to hire new engineers at a rapid rate, companies neglect to train the new engineers properly. As the engineers are assigned tasks, they figure out how to complete them as best they can. Often this means replicating existing facilities in the architecture, which leads to inconsistencies in the user experience, performance problems, and a general mess. And you thought training was expensive. 4. Employee retention. During a time of particularly high attrition at Netscape, I decided to read all of the exit interviews for the entire company to better understand why people quit high-tech companies. After putting economics aside, I found that there were 2 primary reasons why people quit. They hated their manager. Generally, the employees were appalled by the lack of guidance, career development, and feedback they were receiving. They weren't learning anything. The company wasn't investing resources in helping employees develop new skills. An outstanding training program can address both issues head-on. What should you do first? The best place to start is with the topic that is most relevant to your employees, the knowledge and skill that they need to do their job. I call this functional training. Functional training can be as simple as training a new employee on your expectations for them, and as complex as a multi-week engineering boot camp to bring new recruits completely up to speed on all of the historical architectural nuances of your product. The training courses should be tailored to the specific job. If you attempt a more complex style course, be sure to enlist the best experts on the team as well as a manager. As a happy side effect, this type of effort will do more to build a powerful, positive company culture than 100 culture-building strategic offsite meetings. The other essential component of a company's training program is management training. Management training is the best place to start setting expectations for your management team. Do you expect them to hold regular one-on-one meetings with their employees? Do you expect them to give performance feedback? Do you expect them to train their people? Do you expect them to agree on objectives with their team? If you do, then you better tell them, because the management state-of-the-art in technology companies is extremely poor. Once you've set expectations, the next set of management courses has already been defined. They are the courses that teach your managers how to do the things you expect. Once you have management training and functional training in place, there are other opportunities as well. One of the great things about building a tech company is the amazing people that you can hire. Take your best people and encourage them to share their most developed skills. Training in such topics as negotiating, interviewing, and finance will enhance your company's competency in those areas, as well as improve employee morale. Teaching can also become a badge of honor for employees who achieve an elite level of competence. Implementing your training program. Now that we understand the value of the training and what to train on, how do we get our organization to do what we want? The first thing to recognize is that no startup has time to do optional things. Therefore, training must be mandatory. The first two types of training can be easily enforced as follows. Enforce functional training by withholding new employee requisitions. As Andy Grove writes, there are only two ways for a manager to improve the output of an employee: motivation and training. Therefore, training should be the most basic requirement for all managers in your organization. An effective way to enforce this requirement is by withholding new employee requisitions from managers until they've developed a training program for the TBH. To be hired, enforce management training by teaching it yourself. Managing the company is the CEO's job. While you won't have time to teach all the management courses yourself, you should teach the course on management expectations, because they are, after all, your expectations. Make it an honor to participate in these sessions by selecting the best managers on your team to teach the other courses, and make that mandatory. 2. Ironically, the biggest obstacle to putting a training program in place is a perception that it will take too much time. Keep in mind that there is no investment that you can make that will do more to improve productivity in your company. Therefore, being too busy to train is the moral equivalent of being too hungry to eat. Furthermore, it's not that hard to create basic training courses. When I ran the server product management group at Netscape, I became extremely frustrated that everybody on the team I inherited had a completely unique and different interpretation of their job. Finally, I had an epiphany that nobody in the industry had ever defined a product management job. What follows was my attempt to do that and bring down my blood pressure. Amazingly, people still read it today. This taught me the importance of training. Good product manager, bad product manager. Good product managers know the market, the product line, and the competition extremely well and operate from a strong basis of knowledge and confidence. A good product manager is the CEO of the product. Good product managers take full responsibility and measure themselves in terms of the success of the product. They are responsible for right product, right time, and all that entails. A good product manager knows the context going in, and they take responsibility for devising and executing a winning plan. Bad product managers have lots of excuses. Not enough funding. The engineering manager is an idiot. Microsoft has 10 times as many engineers working on it. I'm overworked. I don't get enough direction. Our CEO doesn't make these kind of excuses, and neither should the CEO of a product. Good product managers don't get all their time sucked up by the various organizations that must work together to deliver the right product at the right time. They don't take all the product team minutes. They don't manage the various functions. They are not gophers for engineering. They are not part of the product team. They manage the product team. Engineering teams don't consider good product managers a marketing resource. Good product managers are the marketing counterparts to the engineering manager. Good product managers crisply define the target, the what, and manage the delivery of the what. Bad product managers feel best about themselves when they figure out how. Good product managers communicate crisply to engineering in writing as well as verbally. Good product managers don't give direction informally. Good product managers gather information informally. Good product managers create collateral, FAQs, presentations, and white papers that can be leveraged by salespeople, marketing people, and executives. Bad product managers complain that they spend all day answering questions for the sales force and are swamped. Good product managers anticipate the serious product flaws and build real solutions. Bad product managers put out fires all day. Good product managers take written positions on important issues. Bad product managers voice their opinions verbally and lament that the powers that be won't let it happen. Once bad product managers fail, they point out that they predicted they would fail. Good product managers focus the team on revenue and customers. Bad product managers focus the team on how many features competitors are building. Good product managers define good products that can be executed with a strong effort. Bad product managers define good products that can't be executed or let engineering build whatever they want. Good product managers think in terms of delivering superior value to the marketplace during product planning and achieving market share and revenue goals during the go-to-market phase. Bad product managers get very confused about the differences among delivering value, matching competitive features, pricing, and ubiquity. Good product managers decompose problems. Bad product managers combine all problems into one. Good product managers think about the story they want written by the press. Bad product managers think about covering every feature and being absolutely technically accurate with the press. Good product managers ask the press questions. Bad product managers answer any press question. Good product managers assume members of the press and the analyst community are really smart. Bad product managers assume that journalists and analysts are dumb because they don't understand the subtle nuances of their particular technology. Good product managers err on the side of clarity. Bad product managers never even explain the obvious. Good product managers define their job and their success. Bad product managers constantly want to be told what to do. Good product managers send their status reports and on time every week because they are disciplined. Bad product managers forget to send in their status reports on time because they don't value discipline. Is it okay to hire people from your friend's company? Every good technology company needs great people. The best companies invest time, money, and sweat equity into becoming world-class recruiting machines. But how far should you take your quest to build the world's greatest team? Is it fair game to hire employees from your friend's company? Will you still be friends? First, what I mean by friends? There are two relevant categories. Important business partners friends. For this discussion, friends and important business partners are roughly the same. Most CEOs would never target a friend's company as a source of talent. As CEO, one generally doesn't have many true friends in business, and raiding your friend's company is a sure way to lose one. Nevertheless, almost every CEO will be faced with a decision of whether to hire an employee out of her friend's company. How does it happen? When is it okay? When will it cost you a friend? But they were already looking. It always starts in the same way. Your friend Kathy has a great engineer working for her named Mitchell. Mitchell happens to be friends with one of your top engineers. Your engineer brings Mitchell in for an interview, unbeknownst to you, and he naturally sails through the process. The final step is the interview with you, the CEO. You immediately notice that Mitchell currently works at your good friend Kathy's company. You check with your people to make sure that they did not approach Mitchell first, and they assure you that Mitchell was already looking and will go to another company if not yours. Now what? At this point, you might be thinking, if Mitchell is leaving, then logically my friend Kathy should want to go to my company rather than to a competitor or a company with a CEO whom she doesn't like. Maybe Kathy will see it that way, but probably not. People generally leave companies when things are not going well, so you should assume that Kathy is fighting for her company's life. In this situation, nothing will cut her deeper than losing a great employee, because she knows that the other employees will see that as a leading indicator of the company's demise. Even more damaging for Kathy is the fact that her employees will perceive your move as an act of betrayal. Kathy's so-called friend is raiding her company. They will think, Kathy is such an ineffective that she cannot even keep her friends from hiring her people. In this way, a logical issue quickly becomes an emotional one. You don't want to lose Kathy as a friend, so you assure her that Mitchell is the exception and that he came to you and that he will be the first and only one of her employees that joins your company. Generally, this explanation will work, and Kathy will understand and appreciate the gesture. She will forgive, but rest assured, she will not forget. Her memory of Mitchell will be important, because Mitchell will be just the first step in the demise of your relationship. Since Mitchell is a stellar hire, Kathy's other strong employees will likely call Mitchell to understand why he left and where he is going. He will explain his reasoning, and his reasons will be compelling. And suddenly they will want to follow Mitchell's path and join your company. 2. By the time you become aware of the situation, promises will have been made to prospective employees who approach Mitchell and offers may be out. In each case, your employees will assure you that they were approached by Kathy's employees and not vice versa. They will point out that the candidates have offers from other companies as well, so they will definitely leave and you might as well benefit from their restlessness. Kathy's managers will almost certainly tell a different story. They will plead with her to get her friend to stop raiding their stable of employees, or else they will never be able to meet their commitments. This will embarrass and enrage Kathy. In the end, social pressure will trump all your brilliant countervailing logic. Here's an easy way to think about the dynamic. If your husband left you, would you want your best friend to date him? He's going to date somebody. So wouldn't you want your friend to have him? It seems logical, but this situation is far from logical and you just lost one friend. So what should you do? First, keep in mind that the employees are either extremely good or you probably won't want them in your company anyway. So you'll either be recruiting top-notch employees from your friend's company or you'll be adding mediocre people. Do not assume the people you are taking will not be missed. A good rule of thumb is my reflexive principle of employee rating, which states, if you will be shocked and horrified if Company X hired several of your employees, then you should not hire any of theirs. The number of such companies should be small and may very well be 0. In order to avoid these sticky situations, many companies employ written or unwritten policies that name companies where it is not okay to hire without CEO approval. With such a policy in place, you will be able to give your friend one last chance to save their employee or to object prior to you hiring them. With that in mind, the best way to deal with these situations is openly and transparently. Once you become aware of the conflict between hiring the superstar employee and double-crossing your valued friend, you should get the issue onto the table by informing the employee that you have an important business relationship with his existing company, and you will have to complete a reference check with the CEO prior to extending the offer. Let him know that if he does not want that to happen, then you will stop the process now and keep the process to date confidential. By speaking with your friend before making the hire, you will be able to better judge the relationship impact of hiring her employee. In addition, you may avoid making a bad hire, as often candidates who do well in interviews turn out to be bad employees. Closing thoughts. In the classic movie The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Clint Eastwood, the Good, and Eli Wallach, the Ugly, are partners in crime. Wallach, a known criminal, has a bounty on his head, and the two of them run a scam to collect the reward money. Eastwood turns Wallach in and collects the reward. Then Wallach is sentenced to death by hanging. As Wallach sits on a horse, hands tied behind his back and about to be hanged with a rope around his neck, Eastwood shoots a rope from a distance and frees Wallach, and they split the reward money. This scheme works brilliantly, until one day Eastwood frees Wallach, but informs Wallach, "I don't think you'll ever be worth more than $3,000. Wallach retorts, "What do you mean?" Eastwood informs him, "I mean, our partnership is untied." "Oh no, not you. You remain tied. I'll keep the money, and you can have the rope." What follows is one of the great revenge pursuits in motion picture history. So, when you tell your CEO friend that you don't think she'll ever be worth more than this employee, don't expect to stay friends. Why it's hard to bring big company execs into little companies. So you've achieved product market fit, and you are ready to start building the company. The board encourages you to bring in some been there, done that executives who will provide the right financial, sales, and marketing expertise to help you transition from a world-class product to a world-class business. You see a few candidates that you like, but the venture capitalist on the board says, "You are undershooting. This is going to be a huge company. We can attract better talent." So you aim high and bring in a super accomplished head of sales. This guy has run huge organizations with thousands of employees. He has stellar references and even looks the part. Your VC loves him because he has an awesome resume. 6 months later. Fast forward 6 months, and everyone in the company is wondering why the sales guy who produced nothing got such a monster stock option package. Meanwhile, the people doing all the work have much fewer options. Even worse than not getting your money's worth. Now the company is in trouble because you've been missing the numbers as your super expensive executive sits on his butt. What the frack just happened? The most important thing to understand is that the job of a big company executive is very different from the job of a small company executive. When I was managing thousands of people at Hewlett-Packard after the sale of Opsware, there was an incredible number of incoming demands on my time. Everyone wanted a piece of me. Little companies wanted to partner with me or sell themselves to me. People in my organization needed approvals. Other business units needed my help. Customers wanted my attention, and so forth. As a result, I spent most of my time optimizing and tuning the existing business. Most of the work that I did was incoming. In fact, most skilled big company executives will tell you that if you have more than 3 new initiatives in a quarter, you are trying to do too much. As a result, big company executives tend to be interrupt-driven. In contrast, when you are a startup executive, nothing happens unless you make it happen. In the early days of a company, you have to take 8 to 10 new initiatives a day, or the company will stand still. There is no inertia that's putting the company in motion. Without massive input from you, the company will stay at rest. So what happens? Once you hire one of these big company executives, there are 2 dangerous mismatches that you will face. 1, rhythm mismatch. Your executive has been conditioned to wait for the emails to come in, wait for the phone to ring, and wait for the meetings to get scheduled. In your company, he will be waiting a long time. If your new executive waits, your other employees will become suspicious. You'll hear things like, "What does that guy do all day long?" And "Why did he get so many options?" 2, skill set mismatch. Running a large organization requires very different skills in creating and building an organization. When you run a large organization, you tend to become very good at tasks such as complex decision-making, prioritization, organizational design, process improvement, and organizational communication. When you are building an organization, there is no organization to design. There are no processes to improve, and communicating with the organization is simple. On the other hand, you have to be very adept at running a high-quality hiring process, have terrific domain expertise, know how to create process from scratch, and be extremely creative about initiating new directions and tasks. How can you stop things from going horribly wrong? There are 2 key steps to avoiding disaster. 1, screen for devastating mismatches in the interview process. 2, take integration as seriously as interviewing. Screen for mismatches. How do you tell if the rhythm mismatch or the skill set mismatch will be too much to overcome? Here are some interview questions that I found very helpful. What will you do in your first month on the job? Beware of answers that overemphasize learning. This may indicate that the candidate thinks there is more to learn about your organization than there actually is. More specifically, he may think that your organization is as complex as his current organization. Beware of any indication that the candidate needs to be interrupt-driven rather than setting the pace personally. The interrupts will never come. Look for candidates who come in with more new initiatives than you think are possible. This is a good sign. How will your new job differ from your current job? Look for self-awareness of the differences here. If they have the experience and what you need, they will be articulate on this point. Beware of candidates who think that too much of their experience is immediately transferable. It may pay off down the line, but likely not tomorrow. Why do you want to join a small company? Beware of equity being the primary motivation. 1% of nothing is nothing. That's something that big company executives sometimes have a hard time understanding. It's much better if they want to be more creative. The most important difference between big and small companies is the amount of time running versus creating. A desire to do more creating is the right reason to want to join your company. Aggressively integrate the candidate once on board. Perhaps the most critical step is integration. You should plan to spend a huge amount of time integrating any new executive. Here are some things to keep in mind. Force them to create. Give them monthly, weekly, and even daily objectives to make sure that they produce immediately. The rest of the company will be watching, and this will be critical to their assimilation. Make sure that they get it. Content-free executives have no value in startups. Every executive must understand the product, the technology, the customers, and the market. Force your newbie to learn these things. Consider scheduling a daily meeting with your new executive. Require them to bring a comprehensive set of questions about everything they heard that day but did not completely understand. Answer those questions in depth. Start with first principles. Bring them up to speed fast. If they don't have any questions, consider firing them. If in 30 days you don't feel that they are coming up to speed, definitely fire them. Put them in the mix. Make sure that they initiate contact and interaction with their peers and other key people in the organization. Give them a list of people they need to know and learn from. Once they've done that, require a report from them on what they learned from each person. Final thoughts. Nothing will accelerate your company's development like hiring someone who has experience building a very similar company at larger scale. However, doing so could be fraught with peril. Make sure to pay attention to the important leading indicators of success and failure. Hiring executives. If you've never done the job, how do you hire somebody good? The biggest difference between being a great functional manager and being a great general manager, and particularly a great CEO, is that as a general manager, you must hire and manage people who are far more competent at their jobs than you would be at their jobs. In fact, often you'll have to hire and manage people to do jobs that you have never done. How many CEOs have been head of HR, engineering, sales, marketing, finance, and legal? Probably none. So, with no experience, how do you hire someone good? Step 1, know what you want. Step 1 is definitely the most important step in the process, and also the one that gets skipped most often. As the great self-help coach Tony Robbins says, if you don't know what you want, the chances that you'll get it are extremely low. If you have never done the job, how do you know what to want? First, you must realize how ignorant you are and resist the temptation to educate yourself simply by interviewing candidates. While the interview process can be highly educational, using that as the sole information source is dangerous. Doing so will make you susceptible to the following traps. Hiring on look, and feel it may seem silly to think that anyone would hire an executive based on the way they look and sound in an interview, but in my experience, look and feel are the top criteria for most executive searches. When you combine a CEO who doesn't know what she wants and a board of directors that hasn't thought much about the hire, what do you think the criteria will be? Looking for someone out of central casting, if I had followed this path, I would never have hired Mark Cranny, and you probably would not be reading this now. This wrong-headed approach is the moral equivalent of looking for the platonic ideal for a head of sales. You imagine what the perfect sales executive might be like, and then you attempt to match real-world candidates to your model. This is a bad idea for several reasons. First, you are not hiring an abstract executive to work at an arbitrary company. You must hire the right person for your company at this particular point in time. The head of sales at Oracle in 2010 would likely have failed in 1989. The VP of engineering at Apple might be exactly the wrong choice for Foursquare. The details and the specifics matter. Second, your imaginary model is almost certainly wrong. What is your basis for creating this model? Finally, it will be incredibly difficult to educate an interview team on such an abstract set of criteria. As a result, everybody will be looking for something different. Valuing lack of weakness rather than strength the more experience you have, the more you realize that there is something seriously wrong with every employee in your company. Nobody is perfect. The very best way to know what you want is to act in the role, not just in title, but in real action. In my career, I've been acting VP of HR, CFO, and VP of Sales. Often CEOs resist acting in functional roles because they worry that they lack the appropriate knowledge. This worry is precisely why you should act, to get the appropriate knowledge. Indeed, acting is really the only way to get all the knowledge that you need to make the hire, because you are looking for the right executive for your company today, not a generic executive. In addition to acting in the role, it helps greatly to bring in domain experts. If you know a great head of sales, interview them first and learn what they think made them great. Figure out which of those strengths most directly match the needs of your company. If possible, include the domain expert in the interview process. However, be aware that the domain expert only is part of the knowledge necessary to make the hire. Specifically, she has very little knowledge of your company, how it works, and what its needs are. Therefore, you cannot defer the decision to the domain expert. Finally, be clear in your own mind about your expectations for this person upon joining your company. What will this person do in the first 30 days? What do you expect their motivation to be for joining? Do you want them to build a large organization right away, or hire only 1 or 2 people over the next year? Step 2. Run a process that figures out the right match. In order to find the right executive, you must now take the knowledge that you have gathered and translate it into a process that yields the right candidate. Here is a process that I like to use. Write down the strengths you want and the weaknesses that you are willing to tolerate. In order to ensure completeness, I find it useful to include criteria from the following subdivisions when hiring executives. Will the executive be world-class at running the function? Is the executive outstanding operationally? Will the executive make a major contribution to the strategic direction of the company? This is the are they smart enough? Criterion. Will the executive be an effective member of the team? Effective is the key word. It's possible for an executive to be well-liked and totally ineffective with respect to the other members of the team. It's also possible for an executive to be highly effective and profoundly influential while being totally despised. The latter is far better. These functions do not carry equal weight for all positions. Make sure that you balance them appropriately. Generally, operational excellence is far more important for a VP of engineering or a VP of sales than for a VP of marketing or CFO. Develop questions that test with criteria. This effort is important even if you never ask a candidate any of the pre-prepared questions. By writing down questions that test for what you want, you will get to a level of specificity that will be extremely difficult to achieve otherwise. Assemble an appropriate interview team and conduct the interviews. Assemble the interview team. In assembling the team, you should keep 2 questions in mind. 1. Who will best help you figure out whether the candidate meets the criteria? These may be internal or external people. They can be board members, other executives, or just experts. 2. Who do you need to support the decision once the executive is on board? This group is just as important as the first. No matter how great an executive is, they will have trouble succeeding if the people around them sabotage everything they do. The best way to avoid that is to understand any potential issues before the person is hired. Clearly, some people will be in both groups 1 and 2. The opinions of both groups will be very important. Group 1 will help you determine the best candidate, and Group 2 will help you gauge how easily each candidate will integrate into your company. Generally, it's best to have Group 2 interview finalist candidates only. Next, assign questions to interviewers based on their talents. Specifically, make sure that the interviewer who asks the questions deeply understands what a good answer will sound like. As you conduct the interviews, be sure to discuss each interview with the interviewer. Use this time to drive to a common understanding of the criteria, so that you will get the best information possible. Backdoor and front door references. For the final candidates, it's critically important that the CEO conduct the reference checks herself. The references need to be checked against the same hiring criteria that you tested for during the interview process. Backdoor reference checks can be an extremely useful way to get an unbiased view. However, do not discount the front door references. While they clearly have committed to giving a positive reference, you are not looking for positive or negative with them. You are looking for fit with your criteria. Often, the front door references will know the candidate best and will be quite helpful in this respect. Step 3. Make a lonely decision. Despite many people being involved in the process, the ultimate decision should be made solo. Only the CEO has comprehensive knowledge of the criteria, the rationale for criteria, all of the feedback from interviewers and references, and the relative importance of the various stakeholders. Consensus decisions about executives almost always sway the process away from strength and toward lack of weakness. It's a lonely job, but somebody has to do it. When employees misinterpret managers. Early on at Loudcloud, many people would do crazy things backed up by Ben said. Often I didn't say any of it, but I definitely didn't say it in the way they used it. The management principles I share here are connected to many of those experiences. When I ran Opsware, we had the nonlinear quarter problem, also known affectionately as the hockey stick. The hockey stick refers to the shape of the revenue graph over the course of a quarter. Our hockey stick was so bad that one quarter we booked 90% of our new bookings on the last day of the quarter. Sales patterns like this make it difficult to plan the business and are particularly harrowing when you are, as we were, a public company. Naturally, I was determined to straighten out the hockey stick and bring some sanity to the business. I designed an incentive for salespeople to close deals in the first 2 months of the quarter by issuing bonuses for deals in those months. As a result, the next quarter became slightly more linear and slightly smaller than anticipated. Deals just moved from the third month to the first 2 of the following quarter. When I ran a large engineering group at Netscape, I measured one of our engineering products on schedule, quality, and features. The team shipped a product with all the required features, on time, and with very few bugs. Unfortunately, the product was mediocre because none of the features were that great. When I was at HP, we ran all the businesses by the numbers with extremely strict revenue and margin targets. Some divisions made their numbers, but did so by underfunding R&D. They dramatically weakened their long-term competitive position and set themselves up for future disaster. In all 3 cases, managers got what we asked for, but not what we wanted. How did this happen? Let's take a look. Flattening out the hockey stick, the wrong goal. In retrospect, I should never have asked the team to flatten the quarters. If that is what I wanted, I had to be willing to, at least temporarily, accept smaller quarters. We had a fixed number of salespeople who were maximizing the size of each quarter. In order to deliver linear quarters, they had to modify their behavior and adjust their priorities. Unfortunately, I liked the old priority of maximizing revenue better. Given the situation, I was actually pretty lucky. Sun Tzu, in his classic work The Art of War, warns that giving the team a task that it cannot possibly perform is called crippling the army. In my case, I did not cripple the team, but I screwed up my priorities. The right thing to do would have been to make the hard decision up front about what was more important, maximizing each quarter or increasing predictability. The instruction only made sense if the answer was the second one, focusing too much on the numbers. In the second example, I managed a team to a set of numbers that did not fully capture what I wanted. I wanted a great product that customers would love with high quality and on time, in that order. Unfortunately, the metrics that I set did not capture those priorities. At a basic level, metrics are incentives. By measuring quality, features, and schedule, and discussing them at every staff meeting, my people focus intensely on those metrics to the exclusion of other goals. The metrics did not describe the real goals, and I distracted the team as a result. Interestingly, I see this same problem play out in many consumer internet startups. I often see teams that maniacally focus on their metrics around customer acquisition and retention. This usually works well for customer acquisition, but not so well for retention. Why? For many products, metrics often describe the customer acquisition goal in enough detail to provide sufficient management guidance. In contrast, the metrics for customer retention do not provide enough color to be a complete management tool. As a result, many young companies overemphasize retention metrics and do not spend enough time going deep enough on the actual user experience. This generally results in a frantic numbers chase that does not end in a great product. It's important to supplement a great product vision with a strong discipline around the metrics, but if you substitute metrics for product vision, you will not get what you want. Managing strictly by numbers is like painting by numbers. Some things that you want to encourage will be quantifiable, and some will not. If you report on the quantitative goals and ignore the qualitative ones, you won't get the qualitative goals, which may be the most important ones. Management purely by numbers is sort of like painting by numbers. It's strictly for amateurs. At HP, the company wanted high earnings now and in the future. By focusing entirely on the numbers, HP got them now by sacrificing the future. Note that there were many numbers, as well as more qualitative goals that would have helped. Was our competitive win rate increasing or declining? Was customer satisfaction rising or falling? What did our own engineers think of the products? By managing the organization as though it were a black box, some divisions at HP optimized the present at the expense of their downstream competitiveness. The company rewarded managers for achieving short-term objectives in a manner that was bad for the company. It would have been better to take into account the white box. The white box goes beyond the numbers and gets into how the organization produced the numbers. It penalizes managers who sacrifice the future for the short term and rewards those who invest in the future even if that investment cannot be easily measured. Closing thought. It is easy to see that there are many ways for leaders to be misinterpreted. To get things right, you must recognize that anything you measure automatically creates a set of employee behaviors. Once you determine the result you want, you need to test the description of the result against the employee behaviors that the description will likely create. Otherwise, the side effect behaviors may be worse than the situation you were trying to fix. Management debt. Thanks to Ward Cunningham, the computer programmer who designed the first wiki, the metaphor technical debt is now a well-understood concept. While you may be able to borrow time by writing quick and dirty code, you will eventually have to pay it back with interest. Often this trade-off makes sense, but you will run into serious trouble if you fail to keep the trade-off in the front of your mind. There also exists a less understood parallel concept, which I will call management debt. Like technical debt, management debt is incurred when you make an expedient, short-term management decision with an expensive, long-term consequence. Like technical debt, the trade-off sometimes makes sense, but often does not. More important, if you incur the management debt without accounting for it, then you will eventually go management bankrupt. Like technical debt, management debt comes in too many different forms to elaborate entirely, but a few salient examples will help explain the concept. Here are 3 of the more popular types among startups. 1. Putting 2 in a box. 2. Overcompensating a key employee because she gets another job offer. 3. No performance management or employee feedback process. Putting 2 in the box. What do you do when you have 2 outstanding employees who logically both fit in the same place on the organizational chart? Perhaps you have a world-class architect who is running engineering, but she does not have the experience to scale the organization to the next level. You also have an outstanding operational person who is not great technically. You want to keep both in the company, but you only have one position. So you get the bright idea to put 2 in the box and take on a little management debt. The short-term benefits are clear. You keep both employees. You don't have to develop either because they will theoretically help each other develop, and you instantly close the skill set gap. Unfortunately, you will pay for those benefits with interest and at a very high rate. For starters, by doing this, you will make every engineer's job more difficult. If an engineer needs a decision made, which boss should she go to? If that boss decides, will the other boss be able to override it? If it's a complex decision that requires a meeting, does she have to schedule both heads of engineering for meeting? Who sets the direction for the organization? Will the direction actually get set if doing so requires a series of meetings? In addition, you have removed all accountability. If schedules slip, who is accountable? If engineering throughput becomes uncompetitive, who is responsible? If the operational head is responsible for schedule slip and the technical head is responsible for throughput, what happens if the operational head thrashes the engineers to make the schedule and kills throughput? How would you know that she did that? The really expensive part about both of these things is that they tend to get worse over time. In the very short term, you might mitigate their effects with extra meetings or by attempting to carve up the job in a clear way. However, as things get busy, those once clear lines will fade and the organization will degenerate. Eventually, you'll either make a lump sum payment by making a hard decision and putting one in the box, or your engineering organization will suck forever, overcompensating a key employee because she gets another job offer. An excellent engineer decides to leave a company because she gets a better offer. For various reasons, you are undercompensating her. But the offer from the other company pays more than any engineer in your company, and the engineer in question is not your best engineer. Still, she is working on a critical project, and you cannot afford to lose her. So you match the offer. You save the project, but you pile on the debt. Here's how the payment will come due. You probably think that your counteroffer was confidential because you'd sworn her to secrecy. Let me explain why it was not. She has friends in the company. When she got the offer from the other company, she consulted with her friends. One of her best friends advised her to take the offer. When she decided to stay, she had to explain to him why she disregarded his advice or else lose personal credibility. So she told him and swore him to secrecy. He agreed to honor the secret, but was incensed that she had to threaten to quit in order to get a proper raise. Furthermore, he was furious that you overcompensated her. So he told the story to a few of his friends, but kept her name confidential to preserve the secret. And now everyone in engineering knows that the best way to get a raise is to generate an offer from another company and then threaten to quit. It's going to take a while to pay off that debt. No performance management or employee feedback process. Your company now employs 25 people and you know that you should formalize a performance management process, but you don't want to pay the price. You worry that doing so will make it feel like a big company. Moreover, you do not want your employees to be offended by the feedback because you can't afford to lose anyone right now. And people are happy, so why rock the boat? Why not take on a little management debt? The first noticeable payments will be due when somebody performs below expectations. CEO, he was good when we hired him. What happened? Manager, he's not doing things that we need him to do. CEO, did we clearly tell him that? Manager, maybe not clearly. However, the larger payment will be a silent tax. Companies execute well when everybody is on the same page and everybody is constantly improving. In a vacuum of feedback, there's almost no chance that your company will perform optimally across either dimension. Directions with no corrections will seem fuzzy and obtuse. People rarely improve weakness they are unaware of. The ultimate price you will pay for not giving feedback, systematically crappy company performance. In the end, every really good, really experienced CEO I know shares one important characteristic. They tend to opt for the hard answer to organizational issues. If faced with giving everyone the same bonus to make things easy or with sharply rewarding performance and ruffling many feathers, they'll ruffle the feathers. If given the choice of cutting a popular project today because it's not in the long-term plans or you're keeping it around for morale purposes and to appear consistent, they'll cut it today. Why? Because they paid the price of management debt and they would rather not do that again. Management quality assurance. Everyone in the technology industry seems to agree that people are paramount, yet nobody seems to be on the same page with what the people organization, human resources, should look like. The problem is that when it comes to HR, most CEOs don't really know what they want. In theory, they want a well-managed company with a great culture. Instinctively, they know that an HR organization probably can't deliver that. As a result, CEOs usually punt on the issue and implement something that's suboptimal, if not worthless. Ironically, one of the first things you learn when you run an engineering organization is that a good quality assurance organization cannot build a high-quality product, but it can tell you when a development team builds a low-quality product. Similarly, a high-quality human resources organization cannot make you a well-managed company with a great culture, but can tell you when you and your managers are not getting the job done. The employee life cycle. The best way to approach management quality assurance is through the lens of the employee life cycle. From hire to retire, how good is your company? Is your management team world-class in all phases? How do you know? A great HR organization will support, measure, and help improve your management team. Some of the questions they will help you answer. Recruiting and hiring. Do you sharply understand the skills and talents required to succeed in every open position? Are your interviewers well prepared? Do your managers and employees do an effective job of selling your company to prospective employees? Do interviewers arrive on time? Do managers and recruiters follow up with candidates in a timely fashion? Do you compete effectively for talent against the best companies? Compensation. Do your benefits make sense for your company demographics? How do your salary and stock option packages compare with the companies that you compete with for talent? How well do your performance rankings correspond to your compensation practices? Training and integration. When you hire an employee, how long does it take them to become productive from the perspective of the employee, her peers, and her manager? Shortly after joining, how well does an employee understand what's expected of her? Performance management. Do your managers give consistent, clear feedback to their employees? What is the quality of your company's written performance reviews? Did all of your employees receive their reviews on time? Do you effectively manage out poor performers? Motivation. Are your employees excited to come to work? Do your employees believe in the mission of the company? Do they enjoy coming to work every day? Do you have any employees who are actively disengaged? Do your employees clearly understand what's expected of them? Do employees stay a long time, or do they quit faster than normal? Why do employees quit? Requirements to be great at running HR. What kind of person should you look for to comprehensively and continuously understand the quality of your management team? Here are some key requirements. World-class process design skills, much like the head of quality assurance. The head of HR must be a masterful process designer. One key to accurately measuring critical management processes is excellent process design and control. A true diplomat nobody likes a tattletale, and there is no way for an HR organization to be effective if the management team doesn't implicitly trust it. Managers must believe that HR is there to help them improve rather than police them. Great HR leaders genuinely want to help the managers and couldn't care less about getting credit for identifying problems. They will work directly with the managers to get quality up and only escalate to the CEO when necessary. If an HR leader hoards knowledge, makes power plays, or plays politics, he will be useless. Industry knowledge compensation, benefits, best recruiting practices, etc. are all fast-moving targets. The head of HR must be deeply networked in the industry and stay abreast of all the latest developments. Intellectual heft to be the CEO's trusted advisor. None of the other skills matter if the CEO does not fully back the head of HR in holding the managers to a high-quality standard. In order for this to happen, the CEO must trust the HR leader's thinking and judgment. Understanding things unspoken when management quality starts to break down in a company. Nobody says anything about it, but super perceptive people can tell that the company is slipping. You need one of those. Chapter 6. Concerning the going concern. This ain't for no fuck niggas. If you a real nigga, then fuck with me. Trinidad James, all gold everything. One day in a staff meeting in the Loudcloud Opsware days, someone brought up an issue that had been bothering him for some time. This place is entirely too profane. It's making many of the employees uncomfortable. Others chimed in. It makes the environment unprofessional. We need to put a stop to it. Although the complaints were abstract, they were clearly directed at me since I was the biggest abuser of profanity in the company, and perhaps in industry. In those days, I directed the team with such urgency that it was rare for me to say more than a few sentences without an expletive injected somewhere. Part of it was intentional. I only had so much time with each employee, and it was critically important that I be crystal clear in those moments. Nothing makes things clear like a few choice curse words. That is not the priority. Is radically weaker than that is not the fucking priority. When the CEO drops the F-bomb, it gets repeated. And that's good if you want your message to spread throughout the company. But part of it was also unintentional. At this point, I could barely control myself. This was not an easy company to run, and I developed CEO Tourette's syndrome. The profanity was involuntary. Since the complaints seemed broad and deep, I had to take them seriously. I thought hard about it that night and considered the following. In the technology business, some employees would be comfortable with profanity while others would not. If we outlawed profanity, then some employees or users would not come to work for us or quit once they got there because we would seem old-fashioned and prudish. If we kept profanity, some people might leave. My judgment was biased because I was the main offender. After much consideration, I realized that the best technology companies of the day, Intel and Microsoft, were known to be highly profane places. So we'd be off culture with them and the rest of the modern industry if we stopped profanity. Obviously, that didn't mean that we had to encourage it, but prohibiting it seemed both unrealistic and counterproductive. Attracting the very best engineers meant recruiting from highly profane environments. The choice was between optimizing for top talent or clean culture. Easy decision. I decided to keep the cursing, but I also needed to make a statement. People had complained and had run this issue all the way up the organization, and they deserved an explanation. Explaining things would be tricky, because profanity did not work in all contexts. We certainly could not tolerate profanity used to intimidate or sexually harass employees, so I needed to make the distinction clear. Approving profanity only in certain contexts was a tricky message to craft. That night, I watched a disturbing movie from the late 1970s called Short Eyes, which told the graphic story of a child molester who went to prison and confronted the one clear prison ethic. Child molesters must die. One of the characters in the movie was a young man, referred to by the other inmates as cupcakes. Hard to believe, but watching that movie, I found my solution. The next day, I gave the following speech at the all-company meeting. It has come to my attention that many people are uncomfortable with the amount of profanity that we use. Being the number one abuser, these complaints have caused me to reflect on my own behavior as well as the company as a whole. As I see it, we have two choices. We can ban profanity or we can accept profanity. Anything in between is very unlikely to work. Minimal profanity cannot be enforced. I've said before that we cannot win unless we attract the very best people in the world. In the technology industry, almost everybody comes from a culture that allows profanity. Therefore, banning profanity will likely limit our talent pool more than accepting profanity. As a result, we will allow profanity. However, this does not mean that you can use profanity to intimidate, sexually harass people, or do other bad things. In this way, profanity is no different from other language. For example, consider the word cupcakes. It's fine for me to say to Shannon, "Those cupcakes you bake look delicious." But it is not okay for me to say to Anthony, "Hey, cupcakes, you look mighty fine in them jeans." And that was all I said about that. After that day, I never heard another complaint about profanity, and I don't think we lost anybody because of the policy. Sometimes an organization doesn't need a solution. It just needs clarity. Once I made it clear that cursing was okay, so long as it wasn't used to intimidate or harass, nobody had a problem with it anymore. At least as far as I knew. Bottom line, the results of the policy were good. A comfortable work environment, low attrition, and no complaining. Sometimes the right policy is the one that the CEO can follow. As a company grows, it will change. No matter how well you set your culture, keep your spirit, or slow roll your growth, your company won't be the same when it's 1,000 people as it was when it was 10 people. But that doesn't mean that it can't be a good company when it reaches 1,000, 10,000, or even 100,000 employees. It will just be different. Making it good at scale means admitting that it must be different and embracing the changes that you'll need to make to keep things from falling apart. This chapter explains some of the changes that you will need to make. How to minimize politics in your company. In all my years in business, I have yet to hear someone say, "I love corporate politics." On the other hand, I meet plenty of people who complain bitterly about corporate politics, sometimes even in the companies they run. So, if nobody loves politics, why all the politics? Political behavior almost always starts with the CEO. Now, you may be thinking, I hate politics, I'm not political, but my organization is very political. I clearly didn't cause this. Sadly, you needn't be political to create extreme political behavior in your organization. In fact, it's often the least political CEOs who run the most ferociously political organizations. Apolitical CEOs frequently and accidentally encourage intense political behavior. What I mean by politics, I mean people advancing their careers or agendas by means other than merit and contribution. There may be other types of politics, but politics of this form seem to be the ones that really bother people. How it happens? A CEO creates politics by encouraging and sometimes incentivizing political behavior, often unintentionally. As a very simple example, let's consider executive compensation. When you are CEO, senior employees will come to you from time to time and ask for an increase in compensation. They may suggest that you are paying them far less than their current market value. They may even have a competitive offer in hand. Faced with this confrontation, if the request is reasonable, you might investigate the situation. You might even give the employee a raise. This may sound innocent, but you have just created a strong incentive for political behavior. Specifically, you will be rewarding behavior that has nothing to do with advancing your business. The employee will earn a raise by asking for one rather than as a result of your rewarding them for outstanding performance. Why is this bad? Let me count the ways. 1. The other ambitious members of your staff will immediately get the point and agitate for raises as well. Word always gets out. Note that neither this campaign nor the prior one need be correlated with actual performance. You will now spend time dealing with the political issues rather than actual performance issues. Importantly, if you have a competent board, you will not be able to give them all out-of-cycle raises. So your company executive raises will occur on a first-come, first-served basis. 2. The less aggressive members of your team will be denied off-cycle raises simply by being apolitical. 3. The object lesson for your staff and the company will be that the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and that the most politically astute employees get the raises. Get ready for a whole lot of squeaky wheels. Now, let's move on to a more complicated example. Your CFO comes to you and says that he wants to continue developing as a manager. He says that he would like to eventually become a COO and would like to know what skills he must demonstrate in order to earn that position in your company. Being a positive leader, you would like to encourage him to pursue his dream. You tell him that you think that he'd be a fine COO someday and that he should work to develop a few more skills. In addition, you tell him that he'll need to be a strong enough leader such that other executives in the company will want to work for him. A week later, one of your other executives comes to you in a panic. She says that the CFO just asked her if she'd work for him. She says that he said you are grooming him to be the COO, and that's his final step. Did that just happen? Welcome to the big time. How to minimize politics. Minimizing politics often feels totally unnatural. It's counter to excellent management practices, such as being open-minded and encouraging employee development. The difference between managing executives and managing more junior employees can be thought of as the difference between being in a fight with someone with no training and being in a ring with a professional boxer. If you are in a fight with a regular person, then you can do natural things and they won't get you into much trouble. For example, if you want to take a step backward, you can pick your front foot up first. If you do this against a professional boxer, you will get your block knocked off. Professional boxers train for years to take advantage of small errors in technique. Lifting your front foot first to take a step backward will take you slightly off balance for a split second, and that's all your opponent will need. Similarly, if you manage a junior employee and they ask you about their career development, you can say what comes naturally and generally get away with it. As we saw above, things change when you deal with highly ambitious, seasoned professionals. In order to keep from getting knocked out by corporate politics, you need to refine your technique. The technique. As I developed as a CEO, I found 2 key techniques to be useful in minimizing politics. 1. Hire people with the right kind of ambition. The cases that I described above might involve people who are ambitious, but not necessarily inherently political. All cases are not like this. The surest way to turn your company into the political equivalent of the U.S. Senate is to hire people with the wrong kind of ambition. As defined by Andy Grove, the right kind of ambition is ambition for the company's success with the executive's own success only coming as a byproduct of the company's victory. The wrong kind of ambition is ambition for the executive's personal success regardless of the company's outcome. 2. Build strict processes for potentially political issues and do not deviate. Certain activities attract political behavior. These activities include performance evaluation and compensation, organizational design, and territory promotions. Let's examine each case and how you might build and execute a process that insulates a company from bad behavior and politically motivated outcomes. Performance evaluation and compensation. Often companies defer putting performance management and compensation processes in place. This doesn't mean that they don't evaluate employees or give pay raises. It just means they do so in an ad hoc manner that's highly vulnerable to political machinations. By conducting well-structured, regular performance and compensation reviews, you will ensure that pay and stock increases are as fair as possible. This is especially important for executive compensation, since doing so will also serve to minimize politics. In the example above, the CEO should have had an airtight performance and compensation policy and simply told the executive that his compensation will be evaluated with everyone else's. Ideally, the executive compensation process should involve the board of directors. This will help ensure good governance and make exceptions even more difficult. Organizational design and territory. If you manage ambitious people, from time to time, they will want to expand their scope of responsibility. In the example above, the CFO want to become the COO. In other situations, the head of marketing might want to run sales and marketing, or the head of engineering may want to run engineering and product management. When someone raises an issue like this with you, you must be very careful about what you say, because everything that you say can be turned into political cannon fodder. Generally, it's best to say nothing at all. At most, you might ask why, but if you do, so be sure not to react to reasons. If you indicate what you are thinking, that information will leak, rumors will spread, and you plant the seeds for all kinds of unproductive discussions. You should evaluate your organizational design on a regular basis and gather the information that you need to decide without tipping people off to what you plan to do. Once you decide, you should immediately execute the reorg. Don't leave time for leaks and lobbying. Promotions. Every time your company gives someone promotion, everyone else at that person's organizational level evaluates the promotion and judges whether merit or political favors yielded it. If the latter, then the other employees generally react in one of 3 ways. 1. They sulk and feel undervalued. 2. They outwardly disagree, campaign against a person, and undermine them in their new position. 3. They attempt to copy the political behavior that generated the unwarranted promotion. Clearly, you don't want any of these behaviors in your company. Therefore, you must have a formal, visible, defensible promotion process that governs every employee promotion. Often this process must be different for people on your own staff. The purpose of the process is twofold. First, it will give the organization confidence that the company at least attempted to base the promotion on merit. Second, the process will produce the information necessary for your team to explain the promotion decisions you made. Be careful with, she said, once your organization grows to a significant size, members of your team will from time to time complain about each other. Sometimes this criticism will be extremely aggressive. Be careful about how you listen and the message that it sends. Simply by hearing them out without defending the employee in question, you will send a message that you agree. If people in the company think that you agree that one of your executives is less than stellar, that information will spread quickly and without qualification. As a result, people will stop listening to the executive in question, and the executive will soon become ineffective. There are two distinct types of complaints that you will receive. 1. Complaints about an executive's behavior. 2. Complaints about an executive's competency or performance. Generally, the best way to handle the first type of complaint is to get the complaining executive and the targeted executive in the room together and have them explain themselves. Usually, simply having this meeting will resolve the conflict and correct the behavior and improve the relationship. Do not attempt to address behavioral issues without both executives in the room. Doing so will invite manipulation and politics. Complaints of the second type are both more rare and more complex. If one of your executives summons the courage to complain about the competency of one of their peers, then there's a good chance that either the complainer or the targeted executive has a major problem. If you receive this type of complaint, you will generally have one of two reactions. They will be telling you something that you already know, or they'll be telling you shocking news. If they are telling you something that you already know, then the big news is that you have let the situation go too far. Whatever your reasons for attempting to rehabilitate the wayward executive, you have taken too long, and now your organization has turned on them. You must resolve the situation quickly. Almost always, this means firing the executive. While I've seen executives improve their performance and skill sets, I've never seen one lose the support of the organization and then regain it. On the other hand, if the complaint is new news, then you must immediately stop the conversation and make clear to the complaining executive that you in no way agree with their assessment. You do not want to cripple the other executive before you reevaluate his performance. You do not want the complaint to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Once you've shut down the conversation, you must quickly reassess the employee in question. If you find he is doing an excellent job, you must figure out the complaining executive's motivations and resolve them. Do not let an accusation of this magnitude fester. If you find that the employee is doing a poor job, there will be time to go back and get the complaining employee's input, but you should be on a track to remove the poor performer at that point. As CEO, you must consider the systemic incentives that result from your words and actions. While it may feel good in the moment to be open, responsive, and action-oriented, be careful not to encourage all the wrong things. The right kind of ambition. When hiring a management team, most startups focus almost exclusively on IQ, but a bunch of high IQ people with the wrong kind of ambition won't work. I have already stressed that you should strive to hire people with the right kind of ambition. As I've talked about these ideas in the last few years, I have received a mixed response. Some think it's good advice, while others question it. At a macro level, a company will be most successful if the senior managers optimize for the company's success as opposed to their own personal success. No matter how well the CEO designs the personal incentive programs, they will never be perfect. In addition, career incentives like promotions and territory ownership fall outside the scope of bonus plans and other a priori management tools. In an equity-based compensation structure, optimizing for the company's success should yield better results for individuals as well. As my Opsware head of sales, Mark Craney, used to say, 2% of zero is zero. It is particularly important that managers have the right kind of ambition, because anything else will be exceptionally demotivating for their employees. As an employee, why would I want to work long hours to advance the career of my manager? If the manager cares more about his career than the company, then that's what I'd be doing. Nothing motivates a great employee more than a mission that's so important that it supersedes everyone's personal ambition. As a result, managers with the right kind of ambition tend to be radically more valuable than those with the wrong kind. For a complete explanation of the dangers of managers with the wrong kind of ambition, I strongly recommend Dr. Seuss's management masterpiece, Yertle the Turtle. Screening for the right kind of ambition. As with any complex character trait, there is no way to perfectly screen for the right kind of ambition in an interview, but hopefully some of these thoughts will prove useful. At a macro level, everybody views the world through our own personal prism. When interviewing candidates, it's helpful to watch for small distinctions that indicate whether they view the world through the me prism or the team prism. People who view the world through the me prism might describe a prior company's failure in an interview as follows. My last job was my e-commerce play. I felt that it was important to round out my resume. Note the use of my to personalize a company in a way that it's unlikely that anyone else at the company would agree with. In fact, the other employees in the company might even be offended by this usage. People with the right kind of ambition would not likely use the word play to describe their effort to work as a team to build something substantial. Finally, people who use a me prism find it natural and obvious to speak in terms of building out my resume, while people who use a team prism find such phrases to be somewhat uncomfortable and awkward because they clearly indicate an individual goal that is separate from the team goal. On the other hand, people who view the world purely through the team prism will very seldom use the words I or me even when answering questions about their accomplishments. Even in an interview, they will deflect credit to others on their previous team. They will tend to be far more interested in how your company will win than in how they will be compensated or what their career path will be. When asked about a previously failed company, they will generally feel such great responsibility that they will describe in detail their own misjudgments and bad decisions. When we hired the head of worldwide sales for Opsware, using this screen proved to be quite valuable. Since this was a sales position, I should mention that ambition for the company above one's own goals is particularly important for the head of sales. The reasons are many. The local incentives in sales are particularly strong and difficult to balance without the right kind of leadership. The sales organization is the face of the company to the outside world. If that group optimizes for itself, your company will have a major problem. In high-tech companies, fraud generally starts in sales due to managers attempting to perfect the ultimate local optimization. Throughout our interview process, we met with a lot of candidates who took sole credit for landing extremely large deals, achieving impressive goals, and generating company success. Invariably, the candidates who claimed the most credit for deals would have the most difficult time describing the details of how the deal was actually won and orchestrated. During reference checks, others involved in the deals would tell a very different story. When I spoke to Mark Cranny, on the other hand, it was difficult to get him to discuss his personal accomplishments. In fact, some of the other interviewers felt that Mark was standoffish and even obnoxious in the way he bristled at certain questions. One interviewer complained, Ben, I know that he increased the size of the Nike deal from $1 million to $5 million because our contact at Nike told me that, but Mark wouldn't go into any detail on it. When I interviewed Mark, he really only wanted to discuss how his old company won. He went into great detail about how his team diagnosed weaknesses versus the competition and how he worked with another executive to advance the product. He then talked about how he worked with the CEO to revise the way the sales force was trained and organized. When the conversation turned to Opsware, Mark had already interviewed sales reps at our #1 competitor's company and knew what deals they were in. He relentlessly questioned me on how we were going to win the deals that they were in and how we planned to get into the deals that we weren't in. He wanted to know the strengths and weaknesses of everyone else on the team. He wanted to know the game plan for winning. The topics of his potential compensation and career advancement didn't come up until the very end of the process. And then he only wanted assurances that compensation was performance and not politically based. It was clear that Mark was all about the team and its success. During Mark's tenure, sales increased more than tenfold and our market capitalization increased 20-fold. More to the point, voluntary attrition in the sales organization was extremely low, customers were managed fairly and honestly, and our legal and finance teams often commented that first and foremost, Mark protected the company. Final thought. While it may work to have individual employees who optimize for their own careers, Counting on senior managers to do all the right thing for all the wrong reasons is a dangerous idea. Titles and promotions. Often when I meet with startups, the employees have no job titles. This makes sense because everybody is just working to build a company. Roles needn't be clearly defined and, in fact, can't be because everyone does a little bit of everything. In an environment like this, there are no politics and nobody is jockeying for position or authority. It's rather nice. So why do all organizations eventually create job titles, and what is the proper way to manage them? Why do titles matter? Two important factors drive all companies to eventually create job titles. One, employees want them. While you may plan to work at your company forever, at least some of your employees need to plan for life after your company. When your head of sales interviews for her next job, she won't want to say that despite the fact that she ran a global sales force with hundreds of employees, her title was dude. Two, eventually, people need to know who is who. As companies grow, everybody won't know everybody else. Importantly, employees won't know what each person does and whom they should work with to get their jobs done. Job titles provide an excellent shorthand for describing roles in the company. In addition, customers and business partners can also make use of this shorthand to figure out how to best work with your company. Beyond these core reasons, employees will use titles to calibrate their value and compensation against their colleagues. If an employee with the title of junior engineer believes that she is a far better programmer than her counterpart with the title senior architect, this will indicate to her that she may be underpaid and undervalued. Because titles will be used to calculate relative value, they must be managed carefully. The dangers, the Peter Principle and the law of crappy people. The basics seem obvious, so why does almost every company eventually make serious mistakes regarding titles? If you have ever worked in a company, you have probably thought to yourself about some overly promoted executive. How did he get to be a vice president? I wouldn't let him manage a lemonade stand. One challenge is the Peter Principle, coined by Dr. Lawrence J. Peter and Raymond Hull in their 1969 book of that name. The Peter Principle holds that in a hierarchy, members are promoted so long as they work competently. Sooner or later, they are promoted to a position at which they are no longer competent, and there they remain being unable to earn further promotions. As Andy Grove points out in his Management Classic High Output Management, the Peter Principle is unavoidable because there is no way to know a priori at what level in the hierarchy a manager will be incompetent. Another challenge is a phenomenon that I call the law of crappy people. The law of crappy people states, for any title level in a large organization, the talent on that level will eventually converge to the crappiest person with the title. The rationale behind the law is that the other employees in the company with lower titles will naturally benchmark themselves against the crappiest person at the next level. For example, if Jasper is the worst vice president in the company, then all the directors will benchmark themselves against Jasper and demand promotions as soon as they reach his low level of competency. As with the Peter Principle, the best that you can do is to mitigate the law of crappy people, and that mitigation will be critically important to the quality of your company. Promotion process. The best way to mitigate both the Peter Principle and the law of crappy people is with a properly constructed and highly disciplined promotion process. Ideally, the promotion process should yield a result similar to the very best karate dojos. In top dojos, in order to achieve the next level, you must defeat an opponent in combat at that level. This guarantees that a new black belt is never a worse fighter than the worst current black belt. Frustratingly, there is no exact analog to a fist fight in business, so how can we preserve quality without actual combat? To begin, start with an extremely crisp definition not only of the responsibilities at each level, but also the skill required to perform the duties. When describing the skills, avoid the generic characterizations, such as must be competent at managing a Pandel, or must have excellent management skills. In fact, the best leveling tools get extremely specific and even name names. Should be a superstar recruiter, as good as Jenny Rogers. Next, define a formal process for all promotions. One key requirement of the process should be that promotions will be leveled across groups. If you let a manager or a single chain of command determine promotions unilaterally, then it's possible that, for example, HR will have 5 vice presidents and engineering only 1. One way to level across groups is to hold a regular promotions council that reviews every significant promotion in the company. When a manager wishes to promote an employee, she will submit that employee for review with an explanation of why she believes her employee satisfies the skill criteria required for the level. The committee should then compare the employee with both the level skill description and the skills of the other employees at that level to determine whether to approve the promotion. In addition to ensuring fairness and level quality, this process will serve to educate your entire management team on the skills and accomplishments of the employees being submitted for promotion. Andreessen versus Zuckerberg. How big should the titles be? Should your company make vice president the top title, or should you have chief marketing officers, chief revenue officers, chief people officers, and chief snack officers? There are 2 schools of thought regarding this, one represented by Mark Andreessen, and the other by Mark Zuckerberg. Andreessen argues that people ask for many things from a company: salary, bonus, stock options, span of control, and titles. Of those, title is by far the cheapest, so it makes sense to give the highest titles possible. The hierarchy should have presidents, chiefs, and senior executive vice presidents. If it makes people feel better, let them feel better. Titles cost nothing. Better yet, when competing for new employees with other companies, using Andreessen's method, you can always outbid the competition in at least one dimension. At Facebook, by contrast, Mark Zuckerberg purposely deploys titles that are significantly lower than the industry standard. Senior vice presidents at other companies must take title haircuts down to directors or managers at Facebook. Why does he do this? First, he guarantees that every new employee gets releveled as they enter his company. In this way, he avoids accidentally giving new employees higher titles and positions than better performing existing employees. This boosts morale and increases fairness. Second, it forces all the managers of Facebook to understand and internalize Facebook's leveling system, which serves the company extremely well in their own promotion and compensation processes. He also wants titles to be meaningful and reflect who has influence in the organization. As a company grows quickly, it's important to provide organizational clarity wherever possible, and that gets more difficult if there are 50 VPs and 10 chiefs. Next, he finds that business people often carry inflated titles versus their engineering counterparts. While he recognizes that big titles help them out excellently with getting meetings, he still wants to have an organization where the product people and engineers form the cultural core, so he strives to keep this in check as well. Does Facebook ever miss out on a new hire due to its low titles? Yes, definitely. But one might argue that they miss out on precisely the employees they don't want. In fact, both the hiring and onboarding processes at Facebook have been carefully designed to encourage the right kind of employees to select themselves in and the wrong ones to select themselves out. So which method is better, Andreessen's or Zuckerberg's? The answer is that it depends. Facebook has so many advantages in recruiting employees that being disciplined about absolute title levels does not significantly impair its ability to attract the very best talent. Your company might not have these advantages, so lofty titles may be a good tactic. In either scenario, you should still run a highly disciplined internal leveling and promotion process. Final thought. You might think that so much time spent on promotions and titles places too much importance and focus on silly formalisms. The opposite is true. Without a well-thought-out, disciplined process for titles and promotions, your employees will become obsessed with the resulting inequities. If you structure things properly, nobody other than you will spend much time thinking about titles other than Employee of the Month. When smart people are bad employees. In business, intelligence is always a critical element in any employee, because what we do is difficult and complex, and the competitors are filled with extremely smart people. However, intelligence is not the only important quality. Being effective in a company also means working hard, being reliable, and being an excellent member of the team. When I was a CEO, this was one of the most difficult lessons for me to learn. I felt that it was my job to create an environment where brilliant people of all backgrounds, personality types, and work styles would thrive. And I was right. That was my job. Companies where people with diverse backgrounds and work styles can succeed have significant advantages in recruiting and retaining top talent over those that don't. Still, you can take it too far. And I did. Here are 3 examples of the smartest people in the company being the worst employees. Example 1, the heretic. Any sizable company produces some number of strategies, projects, processes, promotions, and other activities that don't make sense. No large organization achieves perfection. As a result, a company needs lots of smart, super engaged employees who can identify particular weaknesses and help improve them. However, sometimes a really smart employee develops an agenda other than improving the company. Rather than identifying weaknesses so that he can fix them, he looks for faults to build his case. Specifically, he builds his case that the company is hopeless and run by a bunch of morons. The smarter the employee, the more destructive this type of behavior can be. Simply put, it takes a really smart person to be maximally destructive, because otherwise nobody else will listen to him. Why would a smart person try to destroy the company that he works for? There are actually many reasons. Here are a few. 1, she is disempowered. She feels that she cannot access the people in charge, and, as a result, complaining is her only vehicle to get the truth out. 2, she is fundamentally a rebel. She will not be happy unless she is rebelling. This can be a deep personality trait. Sometimes these people actually make better CEOs and employees. 3, she is immature and naive. She cannot comprehend that the people running the company do not know every minute detail of the operation, and therefore they are complicit in everything that's broken. Often, it's very difficult to turn these kinds of cases around. Once an employee takes a public stance, the social pressure for him to be consistent is enormous. If he tells 50 of his closest friends that the CEO is the stupidest person on the planet, then reversing that position will cost him a great amount of credibility the next time he complains. Most people are not willing to take the hit to their credibility. Example 2, the flake. Some brilliant people can be totally unreliable. At Opsware, we once hired an unequivocal genius. Arthur was an engineer in an area of the product where a typical new hire would take 3 months to become fully productive. Arthur got fully up to speed in 2 days. On his 3rd day, we gave him a project that was scheduled to take 1 month. Arthur completed the project in 3 days with nearly flawless quality. More specifically, he completed the project in 72 hours. 72 non-stop hours. No stops, no sleep, no nothing but coding. In his first quarter on the job, he was the best employee that we had, and we immediately promoted him. Then Arthur changed. He would miss days of work without calling in. Then he would miss weeks of work. When he finally showed up, he apologized profusely, but the behavior didn't stop. His work product also degraded. He became sloppy and unfocused. I could not understand how such a stellar employee could go so haywire. His manager wanted to fire him because the team could no longer count on Arthur for anything. I resisted. I knew that the genius was still in him, and I wanted us to find it. We never did. It turned out that Arthur was bipolar and had 2 significant drug problems. He did not like taking his bipolar medication, and he was addicted to cocaine. Ultimately, we had to fire Arthur. But even now, it pains me to think about what might have been. One need not be bipolar to be a flake, but flaky behavior often has a seriously problematic root cause. Causes range from self-destructive streaks to drug habits to moonlighting for other employers. A company is a team effort, and no matter how high an employee's potential, you cannot get value from him unless he does his work in a manner in which he can be relied upon. Example 3, the jerk. This particular smart bad employee type can occur anywhere in the organization, but is most destructive at the executive level. Most executives can be pricks, dicks, a-holes, or a variety of other profane nouns at times. Being dramatically impolite can be used to improve clarity or emphasize an important lesson. That's not the behavior that I am talking about. When used consistently, asinine behavior can be crippling. As a company grows, its biggest challenge always becomes communication. Keeping a huge number of people on the same page, executing the same goals, is never easy. If a member of your staff is a raging jerk, it may be impossible. Some people are so belligerent in their communication style that people just stop talking when they're in the room. If every time anyone brings up an issue with the marketing organization, the VP of marketing jumps down their throats, then guess what topic will never come up? This behavior can become so bad that nobody brings up any topic when the jerk is in the room. As a result, communication across the executive staff breaks down and the entire company slowly degenerates. Note that this only happens if the jerk in question is unquestionably brilliant. Otherwise, nobody will care when she attacks them. The bite only has impact if it comes from a big dog. If one of your big dogs destroys communication on your staff, you need to send her to the pound. When do you hold the bus? The great football coach John Madden was once asked whether he would tolerate a player like Terrell Owens on his team. Owens was both one of the most talented players in the game and one of the biggest jerks. Madden answered, "If you hold the bus for everyone on the team, then you'll be so late you'll miss the game. So you can't do that. The bus must leave on time. However, sometimes you'll have a player that's so good that you hold the bus for him, but only him." Phil Jackson, the coach who has won the most NBA championships, was once asked about his famously flaky superstar Dennis Rodman. Since Dennis Rodman is allowed to miss practice, does this mean other star players like Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen can miss practice too? Jackson replied, "Of course not. There's only room for one Dennis Rodman on this team. In fact, you really can only have a very few Dennis Rodmans in society as a whole. Otherwise, we would degenerate into anarchy. You may find yourself an employee who fits one of the above descriptions, but nonetheless makes a massive positive contribution to the company. You may decide that you will personally mitigate the employee's negative attributes and keep her from polluting the overall company culture. That's fine, but remember, you can only hold the bus for her. Old people. Your startup is going well, and as your business expands, you hear the dreaded words from someone on your board. You need to hire some senior people. Some real been there, done that executives to help you get the company to the next level. Really? Is now the time? If so, where'd I begin? And once I get them, what do I do with them? And how will I know if they're doing a good job? The first question you might ask is, why do I need senior people at all? Won't they just ruin the culture with their fancy clothes, political ambitions, and need to go home to see their families? To some extent, the answer to all of those may be yes, which is why this question must be taken quite seriously. However, bringing in the right kind of experience at the right time can mean the difference between bankruptcy and glory. Let's go back to the first part of the question. Why hire a senior person? The short answer is time. As a technology startup, from the day you start until your last breath, you will be in a furious race against time. No technology startup has a long shelf life. Even the best ideas become terrible ideas after a certain age. How would Facebook go if Zuckerberg started it last week? At Netscape, we went public when we were 15 months old. Had we started 6 months later, we would have been late to a market with 37 other browser companies. Even if nobody beats you to the punch, no matter how beautiful your dream, most employees will lose faith after the first 5 or 6 years of not achieving it. Hiring someone who has already done what you are trying to do can radically speed up your time to success. But CEO, beware. Hiring senior people into a startup is kind of like an athlete taking performance-enhancing drugs. If all goes well, you will achieve incredible new heights. If all goes wrong, you will start degenerating from the inside out. In order to make all go well, if you are considering hiring a senior person, do not chase an abstract rationale like adult supervision or becoming a real company. A weak definition of what you are looking for will lead to a bad outcome. The proper reason to hire a senior person is to acquire knowledge and experience in a specific area. For example, as a technical founder, you probably do not have terrific knowledge of how to build a worldwide sales channel, how to create an invincible brand, or how to identify and negotiate ecosystem-altering business development deals. Acquiring a world-class senior person can dramatically accelerate your company's ability to succeed in these areas. One good test for determining whether to go with outside experience versus internal promotion is to figure out whether you value inside knowledge or outside knowledge more for position. For example, for engineering managers, a comprehensive knowledge of the code base and engineering team is usually more important and difficult to acquire than knowledge of how to run scalable engineering organizations. As a result, you might very well value the knowledge of your own organization more than that of the outside world. In hiring someone to sell your product to large enterprises, the opposite is true. Knowing how your target customers think and operate, knowing their cultural tendencies, understanding how to recruit and measure the right people in the right regions of the world to maximize your sales. These things turn out to be far more valuable than knowing your own company's product and culture. This is why when the head of engineering gets promoted from within, she often succeeds. When the head of sales gets promoted from within, she almost always fails. Asking yourself, do I value internal or external knowledge more for this position? Will help you determine whether to go for experience or youth. Once they arrive, bringing senior people on board can be fraught with peril, as I have outlined in the sections why it's hard to bring big company execs into little companies and hiring executives. If you've never done the job, how do you hire somebody good? Equally difficult is managing them effectively once they come on board. Senior people pose several important challenges. They come with their own culture. They will bring the habits, the communication style, and values from the company they grew up in. It's very unlikely these will match your environment exactly. They will know how to work the system. Because senior people come from larger environments, they usually develop the skills to navigate and be effective in those environments. These skills may seem political and unusual in your environment. You don't know the job as well as they do. In fact, you are hiring them precisely because you don't know how to do the job. So, how do you hold them accountable for doing a good job? In order to prevent the internal degeneration mentioned earlier, it's important to be aware of the above issues and then employ appropriate countermeasures to make sure they don't metastasize. First, you should demand cultural compliance. It's fine that people come from other company cultures. It's true that some of those cultures will have properties that are superior to your own, but this is your company, your culture, and your way of doing business. Do not be intimidated by experience on this issue. Stick to your guns and stick to your culture. If you want to expand your culture to incorporate some of the new thinking, that's fine, but do so explicitly. Do not drift. Next, watch for politically motivated tactics, and do not tolerate them. Perhaps most important, set a high and clear standard for performance. If you want to have a world-class company, you must make sure that the people on your staff, be they young or old, are world-class. It is not nearly enough that someone on your staff can do the job better than you can. Because you are incompetent at the job, that's why you hired them in the first place. Be careful not to set a low bar, because you have not done the work to know what good is. For example, I've seen many a young CEO excited about her company's competency in marketing and PR because she got a bunch of positive stories on her launch. That's not a high PR standard. Anybody can get reporters to write nice things about a sweet, cuddly baby of a company. Only world-class PR people can deal with gangly, pimple-ridden, teenage companies. World-class PR people can turn around negative stories. World-class PR people can turn chicken shit into chicken salad. Turning chicken shit into chicken salad requires long-term, trusted relationships, deep know-how, and the confidence to make use of both appropriately. PR kids don't have any of the three. One excellent way to develop a high standard is to interview people who you see doing a great job in their field. Find out what their standard is and add it to your own. Once you determine a high yet achievable performance bar, hold your executive to that high standard even if you have no idea how they might achieve it. It's not your job to figure out how to create an incredible brand, tilt the playing field by cutting a transformational deal, or achieve a sales goal that nobody thought possible. That's what you are paying them to do. That's why you hired them. Finally, you'll need your new executive to be more than just a goal achiever. She will need to be well-rounded and part of the team. Bill Campbell developed an excellent methodology for measuring executives in a balanced way that will help you achieve this. He breaks performance down into 4 distinct areas. 1. Results against objectives. Once you've set a high standard, it will be straightforward to measure your executive against that standard. 2. Management. Even if an executive does a superb job achieving her goals, that doesn't mean she is building a strong and loyal team. It's important to understand how well she is managing, even if she is hitting her goals. 3. Innovation. It's quite possible for an executive to hit her goal for the quarter by ignoring the future. For example, a great way for an engineering manager to hit her goals for features and dates is by building a horrible architecture, which won't even support the next release. This is why you must look beyond the black box results and into the sausage factory to see how things get made. 4. Working with peers, this may not be intuitive at first, but executives must be effective at communicating, supporting, and getting what they need from the other people on your staff. Evaluate them along this dimension. Man, you sold your soul. Hiring the first senior people into your company may feel like selling your soul, and if you are not careful, you may well end up selling the soul of your company. But if you want to make something from nothing, you have to take risks, and you have to win your race against time. This means acquiring the very best talent, knowledge, and experience, even if it requires dealing with some serious age diversity. One-on-one. After I first wrote about one-on-ones, people flooded me with feedback about one-on-ones. About half the responders chastised me, saying that one-on-ones were useless and that I shouldn't put so much emphasis on them. The other half want to know how to run more effective one-on-ones. It seems to me that both groups are likely talking about 2 sides of the same coin. Perhaps the CEO's most important operational responsibility is designing and implementing the communication architecture for her company. The architecture might include the organizational design, meetings, processes, email, Yammer, and even one-on-one meetings with managers and employees. Absent a well-designed communication architecture, information and ideas will stagnate, and your company will degenerate into a bad place to work. While it is quite possible to design a great communication architecture without one-on-one meetings, in most cases one-on-ones provide an excellent mechanism for information and ideas to flow up the organization and should be part of your design. Generally, people who think one-on-one meetings are a bad idea have been victims of poorly designed ones. The key to a good one-on-one meeting is the understanding that it is the employee's meeting rather than the manager's meeting. This is the free-form meeting for all the pressing issues, brilliant ideas, and chronic frustrations that do not fit neatly into status reports, email, and other less personal and intimate mechanisms. If you are an employee, how do you get feedback from your manager on an exciting, but only 20% formed idea that you're not sure is relevant, without sounding like a fool? How do you point out that a colleague you do not know how to work with is blocking your progress without throwing her under the bus? How do you get help when you love your job, but your personal life is melting down? Through a status report? On email? Yammer? Asana? Really? For these and other important areas of discussions, one-on-ones can be essential. If you like structured agendas, then the employee should set the agenda. A good practice is to have the employee send you the agenda in advance. This will give her a chance to cancel the meeting if nothing is pressing. It also makes clear that it is her meeting and will take as much or as little time as she needs. During the meeting, since it's the employee's meeting, the manager should do 10% of the talking and 90% of the listening. Note that this is the opposite of most one-on-ones. While it's not the manager's job to set the agenda or do the talking, the manager should try to draw the key issues out of the employee. The more introverted the employee, the more important this becomes. If you manage engineers, drawing out issues will be an important skill to master. Some questions that I found be very effective in one-on-ones. If we could improve in any way, how will we do it? What's the number one problem with our organization? Why? What's not fun about working here? Who is really kicking ass in the company? Whom do you admire? If you were me, what changes would you make? What don't you like about the product? What's the biggest opportunity that we're missing out on? What are we not doing that we should be doing? Are you happy working here? In the end, the most important thing is that the best ideas, the biggest problems, and the most intense employee life issues make their way to the people who can deal with them. One-on-ones are a time-tested way to do that, but if you have a better one, go ahead with your bad self. Programming your culture. Ask 10 founders about company culture and what it means, and you'll get 10 different answers. It's about office design. It's about screening out the wrong kind of employees. It's about values. It's about fun. It's about alignment. It's about finding like-minded employees. It's about being cult-like. So what is culture? Does culture matter? If so, how much time should you spend on it? Let's start with the second question first. The primary thing that any technology startup must do is build a product that's at least 10 times better at doing something than the current prevailing way of doing that thing. 2 or 3 times better will not be good enough to get people to switch to the new thing fast enough or in large enough volume to matter. The second thing that any technology startup must do is to take the market. If it's possible to do something 10 times better, it's also possible that you won't be the only company to figure that out. Therefore, you must take the market before somebody else does. Very few products are 10 times better than the competition's. So unseating the new incumbent is much more difficult than unseating the old one. If you fail to do both of those things, your culture won't matter one bit. The world is full of bankrupt companies with world-class cultures. Culture does not make a company. So why bother with culture at all? 3 reasons. 1, it matters to the extent that it can help you achieve the above goals. 2, as your company grows, culture can help you preserve your key values, make your company a better place to work, and help it perform better in the future. 3, perhaps most important, after you and your people go through the inhuman amount of work that it will take to build a successful company, it will be an epic tragedy if your company culture is such that even you don't want to work there. Creating a company culture. When I refer to company culture, I am not referring to other important activities like company values and employee satisfaction. Specifically, I am writing about designing a way of working that will distinguish you from competitors. Ensure that critical operating values persist, such as delighting customers or making beautiful products. Help you identify employees who fit with your mission. Culture means lots of other things in other contexts, but the above will be plenty to discuss here. When you start implementing your culture, keep in mind that most of what will be retrospectively referred to as your company's culture will not have been designed into the system, but rather will have evolved over time based on your behavior and the behavior of your early employees. As a result, you will want to focus on a small number of culture design points that will influence a large number of behaviors over a long period of time. In his best-selling book, Built to Last, Jim Collins wrote that one of the things that long-lasting companies he studied have in common is a cult-like culture. I found this description to be confusing because it seems to imply that as long as your culture is weird enough and you are rabid enough about it, you will succeed on the cultural front. That's related to the truth, but not actually true. In reality, Collins was right that a properly designed culture often ends up looking cult-like in retrospect, but that's not the initial design principle. You needn't think hard about how you can make your company seem bizarre to outsiders. However, you do need to think about how you can be provocative enough to change what people do every day. Ideally, a cultural design point will be trivial to implement but have far-reaching behavioral consequences. Key to this kind of mechanism is shock value. If you put something into your culture that is so disturbing that it always creates a conversation, it will change behavior. As we learn in The Godfather, ask a Hollywood mogul to give someone a job and he might not respond. Put a horse's head in his bed and unemployment will drop by 1. Shock is a great mechanism for behavioral change. Here are 3 examples. Desks made out of doors very early on, Jeff Bezos, founder and CEO of Amazon.com, envisioned a company that made money by delivering value to rather than extracting value from its customers. In order to do that, he wanted to be both the price leader and customer service leader for the long run. You can't do that if you waste a lot of money. Jeff could have spent years auditing every expense and raining hell on anybody who overspent, but he decided to build frugality into his culture. He did it with an incredibly simple mechanism. All desks at Amazon.com for all time will be built by buying cheap doors from Home Depot and nailing legs to them. These door desks are not great ergonomically, nor do they fit with Amazon. Comms went under $50 billion, plus market capitalization. But when a shocked new employee asks why she must work on a makeshift desk constructed out of random Home Depot parts, the answer comes back with withering consistency. We look for every opportunity to save money so that we can deliver the best products for the lowest cost. If you don't like sitting at a door, then you won't last long at Amazon. $10 per minute when we started Andreessen Horowitz. Mark and I wanted the firm to treat entrepreneurs with great respect. We remembered how psychologically brutal the process of building a company was. We wanted a firm to respect the fact that in the bacon and egg breakfast of startup, we were with the chicken and the entrepreneur was the pig. We were involved, but she was committed. We thought that one way to communicate respect would be to always be on time to meetings with entrepreneurs, rather than make them wait in our lobby for 30 minutes while we attended to more important business like so many venture capitalists that we visited. We wanted our people to be on time, prepared, and focused. Unfortunately, anyone who has ever worked anywhere knows that this is easier said than done. In order to shock the company into the right behavior, we instituted a ruthlessly enforced $10 per minute fine for being late to a meeting with an entrepreneur. So, for example, you are on a really important call and will be 10 minutes late? No problem. Just bring $100 to the meeting and pay your fine. When new employees come on board, they find this shocking, which gives us a great opportunity to explain in detail why we respect entrepreneurs. If you don't think entrepreneurs are more important than venture capitalists, we can't use you at Andreessen Horowitz. Move fast and break things. Mark Zuckerberg believes in innovation, and he believes there can be no great innovation without great risk. So, in the early days of Facebook, he deployed a shocking motto, move fast and break things. Did the CEO really want us to break things? I mean, he's telling us to break things. A motto that shocking forces everyone to stop and think. When they think, they realize that if you move fast and innovate, you will break things. If you ask yourself, should I attempt this breakthrough? It will be awesome, but it may cause problems in the short term. You have your answer. If you'd rather be right than innovative, you won't fit in at Facebook. Prior to figuring out the exact form of your company's shock therapy, be sure that your mechanism agrees with your values. For example, Jack Dorsey will never make his own desks out of doors at Square, because at Square, beautiful design trumps frugality. When you walk into Square, you can feel how seriously they take design. Why dogs at work and yoga aren't culture? Startups today do all kinds of things to distinguish themselves. Many great, many original, many quirky, but most of them will not define the company's culture. Yes, yoga may make your company a better place to work for people who like yoga. It may also be a great team-building exercise for people who like yoga. Nonetheless, it's not culture. It will not establish a core value that drives the business and helps promote it in perpetuity. It is not specific with respect to what your business aims to achieve. Yoga is a perk. Somebody keeping a pit bull in her cube may be shocking. The lesson learned, that animal lovers are welcome or that employees can live however they want, may provide some societal value, but it does not connect to your business in a distinguishing way. Every smart company values its employees. Perks are good, but they are not culture. The point of it all. In the later section, How to Evaluate CEOs, I describe the CEO job as knowing what to do and getting the company to do what you want. Designing a proper company culture will help you get your company to do what you want in certain important areas for a very long time, taking the mystery out of scaling a company. If you want to build an important company, then at some point you have to scale. People in startup land often talk about the magic of how few people built the original Google or the original Facebook. But today's Google employs 20,000 people, and today's Facebook employs more than 1,500 people. So, if you want to do something that matters, then you are going to have to learn the black art of scaling a human organization. Often board members give entrepreneurs 2 bits of advice regarding scale. 1, get a mentor. 2, find some been there, done that executives who already know how to scale. These answers, while fine as far as they go, have some important limitations. First, If you don't know anything about scaling an organization, then it will be very difficult for you to evaluate people for that job. Imagine trying to find a killer engineer if you'd never written a single program. Second, many investor board members don't know anything about scaling a company either, and can be suckers for people who have the experience but not the skills. If you've ever worked in a large organization, you know that there are plenty of people with experience running them, but none of the requisite skills to run them well. This advice is still good, but the right way to pick both the best mentors and best employees is by first learning the basics. Then you can apply the myriad of scaling techniques in the management literature depending on the context. The basic idea: give ground grudgingly. When an organization grows in size, things that were previously easy become difficult. Specifically, the following things that cause no trouble when you're small become big challenges as you grow. Communication. Common knowledge decision-making. In order to get a clear understanding of the problem, let's start with a boundary condition. Imagine a company of one employee. That employee writes and tests all the code, does all the marketing and sales, and manages herself. She has complete knowledge of everything in the company, makes all the decisions, needn't communicate with anyone, and is totally aligned with herself. As the company grows, things will only get worse in each dimension. On the other hand, if the company doesn't expand, then it will never be much of a company, so the challenge is to grow but degrade as slowly as possible. There's a great analog to this concept in American football. An offensive lineman's job is to protect the quarterback from onrushing defensive linemen. If the offensive lineman attempts to do this by holding his ground, the defensive lineman will easily run around him and crush the quarterback. As a result, offensive linemen are taught to lose the battle slowly or to give ground grudgingly. They are taught to back up and allow the defensive lineman to advance, but just a little at a time. When you scale an organization, you will also need to give ground grudgingly. Specialization, organizational structure, and process all complicate things, and implementing them will feel like you are moving away from common knowledge and quality communication. It is very much like the offensive lineman taking a step backward. You will lose ground, but you will prevent your company from descending into chaos. How to do it? At the point when adding people into the company feels like more work than the work that you can offload to the new employees, the defensive lineman has run around you, and you probably need to start giving ground grudgingly. Specialization. The first scale technique to implement is specialization. In startups, everybody starts out as a jack of all trades. For example, engineers write code, manage the build system, test a product, and increasingly deploy it and operate it. This works well in the beginning because everybody knows everything and the need to communicate is minimized. There are no complicated handoffs because there is nobody to hand anything to. As the company grows, it becomes increasingly difficult to add new engineers because the learning curve starts to get super steep. Getting a new engineer up to speed starts to become more difficult than doing the work yourself. At this point, you need to specialize. By dedicating people and teams to such tasks as the build environment, the test environment, and operations, you'll create some complexity, handouts across groups, potentially conflicting agendas, and specialize rather than common knowledge. In order to mitigate these issues, you will need to consider other scale techniques like organizational design and process. Organizational design. The first rule of organizational design is that all organizational designs are bad. With any design, you'll optimize communication among some parts of the organization at the expense of other parts. For example, if you put product management in the engineering organization, you will optimize communication between product management and engineering at the expense of communication between product management and marketing. As a result, as soon as you roll out the new organization, people will find fault with it and they will be right. Nonetheless, at some point the monolithic design of one huge organization runs out of gas, and you will need to split things into smaller subgroups. At the most basic level, you'll want to consider giving the groups that you specialize their own managers as they grow. You may want a QA manager, for example. After that, things become more complex. Do client engineering and server engineering have their own groups, or do you organize by use cases and include all technical components? When you get really big, You'll need to decide whether to organize the entire company around functions or around missions, self-contained business units that contain multiple functions. Your goal is to choose the least of all evils. Think of the organizational design as the communications architecture for your company. If you want people to communicate, the best way to accomplish that is to make them report to the same manager. By contrast, the further away people are in the organizational chart, the less they will communicate. The organizational design is also the architecture for how the company communicates with the outside world. For example, you might want to organize your sales force by product to maximize communication with the relevant product groups and maximize the product competency of the sales force. If you do that, then you will do so at the expense of simplicity for customers who buy multiple products and will now have to deal with multiple salespeople. With this in mind, here are the basic steps to organizational design. 1. Figure out what needs to be communicated. Start by listing the most important knowledge and who needs to have it. For example, knowledge of the product architecture must be understood by engineering, QA, product management, marketing, and sales. 2. Figure out what needs to be decided. Consider the types of decisions that must get made on a frequent basis. Feature selection, architectural decisions, how to resolve support issues. How can you design the organization? Put the maximum number of decisions under the domain of a designated manager. 3. Prioritize the most important communication and decision paths. Is it more important for product managers to understand the product architecture or the market? Is it more important for engineers to understand the customer or the architecture? Keep in mind that these priorities will be based on today's situation. If the situation changes, then you can reorganize. 4. Decide who's going to run each group. Notice that this is the fourth step, not the first. You want to optimize the organization for the people doing the work, not for the managers. Most large mistakes in organizational design come from putting the individual ambitions of the people at the top of the organization ahead of the communication paths for the people at the bottom of the organization. Making this step 4 will upset your managers, but they will get over it. 5. Identify the paths that you did not optimize. As important as picking the communication paths that you will optimize is identifying the ones that you will not. Just because you deprioritize them doesn't mean they are unimportant. If you ignore them entirely, they will surely come back to bite you. 6. Build a plan for mitigating the issues identified in step 5. Once you've identified the likely issues, you will know the processes you will need to build to patch the impending cross-organizational challenges. These 6 steps should get you pretty far. When we examine advanced organizational design, we'll also need to consider trade-offs such as speed versus cost, how to roll out organizational changes, and how often you should reorganize. Process. The purpose of process is communication. If there are 5 people in your company, you don't need process because you can just talk to each other. You can hand off tasks with a perfect understanding of what's expected. You pass important information from one person to another, and you can maintain high-quality transactions with no bureaucratic overhead. With 4,000 people, communication becomes more difficult. Ad hoc, point-to-point communication no longer works. You need something more robust, a communication bus, or, to use a conventional term for human communication buses, a process. A process is a formal, well-structured communication vehicle. It can be a heavily engineered Six Sigma process, or it can be a well-structured regular meeting. The size of the process should be scaled up or down to meet the needs of the communication challenge that it facilitates. When communication in an organization spans across organizational boundaries, processes will help ensure that the communication happens, and that it happens with quality. If you are looking for the first process to implement in your company, consider the interview process. It usually runs across organizational boundaries. The hiring group, the human resources, or wherever the recruiter lives, and supporting groups involves people from outside the company and is critically important to the success of the company. Who should design a process? The people who are already doing the work in an ad hoc manner. They know what needs to be communicated and to whom. Naturally, they will be the right group to formalize the existing process and make it scalable. When should you start implementing processes? While that varies depending on your situation, keep in mind that it's much easier to add new people to old processes than new processes to old people. Formalize what you're doing to make it easy to onboard new people. Much has been written about process design, so I won't repeat that here. I have found the basics of production, the first chapter of Andy Grove's High Output Management, to be particularly helpful. For new companies, here are a few things to keep in mind. Focus on the output first. What should the process produce? In the case of the interview process, an outstanding employee. If that's the goal, what's the process to get there? Figure out how you'll know if you're getting what you want at each step. Are you getting enough candidates? Are you getting the right candidates? Will your interview process find the right person for the job? Once you select a person, will they accept the job? Once they accept the job, will they become productive? Once they become productive, will they stay with your company? How will you measure each step? Engineer accountability into the system. Which organization and which individual is responsible for each step? What can you do to increase the visibility of their performance? Final thought. The process of scaling a company is not unlike the process of scaling product. Different sizes of company impose different requirements on the company's architecture. If you address those requirements too early, your company will seem heavy and sluggish. If you address those requirements too late, your company may melt down under the pressure. Be mindful of your company's true growth rate as you add architectural components. It's good to anticipate growth, but it's bad to over-anticipate growth. The scale anticipation fallacy. The other day, I was talking to a couple friends of mine, one a VC and the other a CEO. During the meeting, we discussed one of the executives at the CEO's company. The executive in question performs exceptionally but lacks experience managing at larger scale. My friend, the VC, innocently advised the CEO to carefully consider whether the executive would scale to meet the company's needs in the future. I responded swiftly, aggressively, and loudly, saying, "That's a horrible idea and makes no sense at all." Both of my friends were startled at my outburst. Normally, I am disciplined enough to refrain from letting my feelings pass straight through my mouth without stopping at my brain for review. Why the outburst? Here is my answer. As CEO, you must constantly evaluate all the members of your team. However, evaluating people against the future needs of the company based on a theoretical view of how they will perform is counterproductive for the following reasons. Managing at scale is a learned skill rather than a natural ability. Nobody comes out of the womb knowing how to manage 1,000 people. Everybody learns at some point. It's nearly impossible to make the judgment in advance. How do you tell in advance if an executive can scale? Was it obvious that Bill Gates would learn how to scale when he was a Harvard dropout? How do you go about making that decision? The act of judging people in advance will retard their development. If you make a judgment that someone is incapable of doing something such as running a larger organization, will it make sense to teach them those skills, or even point out the anticipated deficiencies? Probably not. You've already decided they can't do it. Hiring scalable execs too early is a bad mistake. There is no such thing as a great executive. There is only a great executive for a specific company at a specific point in time. Mark Zuckerberg is a phenomenal CEO for Facebook. He would not be a good CEO for Oracle. Similarly, Larry Ellison does a terrific job at Oracle, but he would not be the right person to manage Facebook. If you judge your team in advance and have a high sense of urgency, you will bring in executives who can manage at high scale in advance of needing them. Unfortunately, you'll probably ignore their ability to do the job for the next 12 months, which is the only relevant measure. As a result, you will swap out good executives for worse ones. You still have to make the judgment at the actual point in time when you hit the higher level of scale. Even if you avoid the trap of hiring a scalable executive too early or retarding the new executive's development, you still haven't actually bought yourself anything by making the prejudgment. Regardless of what you decided at point in time A, you still have to evaluate the situation with far better data at point in time B. It's no way to live your life or run an organization. Deciding that someone who works their butt off does a terrific job and loyally contributes to your mission won't be with you 3 years from now takes you to a dark place. It's a place of information hiding, dishonesty, and stilted communication. It's a place where prejudice substitutes for judgment. It's a place where judgment replaces teaching. It's a place where teamwork becomes internal warfare. Don't go there. So, if you don't prejudge people's ability to scale, how do you make the judgment? You should evaluate your team at least once a quarter on all dimensions. 2 keys can help you avoid the scale anticipation trap. Don't separate scale from the rest of the evaluation. The relevant question isn't whether an executive can scale. It's whether the executive can do the job at the current scale. You should evaluate holistically, and this will prevent you from separating out scale, which often leads to an unwise prediction of future performance. Make the judgment on a relative rather than an absolute scale. Asking yourself whether an executive is great can be extremely difficult to answer. A better question: for this company at this exact point in time, does there exist an executive who I can hire who will be better? If my biggest competitor hires that person, how will that impact our ability to win? Predicting whether an executive can scale corrupts your ability to manage, is unfair, and doesn't work.